Requiem Radio. With me today, I have a very special guest on our show, someone that I look up to a lot and I think is doing a phenomenal job in Catholic circles. It's the one and only Pinesap. So far, he's been doing tons of content creation, primarily on videos, and recently been doing debates and stepping into that ring. Really glad to have him on. Can't say enough, but I'd like to first introduce my co-host today. It's going to be John, and then we'll bring it over to Pinesap. Hey, John, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hey, everybody. It's John. Last couple of times already said before recording that, but anyway, glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And Pinesap, care to introduce yourself for the audience at home?
Yeah, hey, everybody. I'm Pinesap. I'm, the online Catholic apologist guy trying to, help Gen Z embrace our Lord Jesus Christ and embrace the Catholic faith. And I think that's really just kind of my resume. So that's the main way I would introduce myself.
No, definitely. And I'm really glad I'm able to get you on. It's honestly a treat. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. But to kick off the show, the first thing I want to ask you, and this is really for people listening in who may have never heard of you before, but who is Pinesap? Like, where does the idea come from for the name, for the aesthetics, the imagery? What made you come up with this idea?
Oh, dude, that's a great question. So basically, the name Pinesap comes from the fact that I'm born and raised in Colorado my entire life. And I grew up around pine trees, especially. So I grew up in a pine forest. I got to, go outside, explore the woods and stuff like that. Hiking was a huge part of my childhood, just being out in nature. And I've always loved that. That's been a huge part of my life. And originally, when I had kind of gotten more online and more in online scenes, I wanted to call myself Pine Sol Groiper, because a lot of Groipers would kind of name themselves things like after their state. So it'd be like Michigan Groiper, or it'd be like Arizona Chad or something like that, right? And I was like, okay, well, there's already a Colorado Groiper, so maybe I should be, something related to pine trees. And I was like, Pine Sol is like kind of a cool product. I could see like making like a good Groiper profile picture off of that idea. But ultimately, after kind of talking about it with my buddy Spexo, he was like, well, there's a ton of pine trees around you. Why don't you call yourself Pinesap Groiper, right? But after we kind of workshopped the idea a little bit more, it ultimately settled down on the name Pinesap because, Spexo, my co-host on Logos Triumphant and one of my best friends, was kind of talking to me, and he's like, well, if you call yourself Pinesap Groiper, it kind of pins you as like you're only a Groiper, and in that way you're not able to kind of like reach people who might be kind of on the outside of the Groiper movement or what have you. So he says, why don't you call yourself, you're still a Groiper, of course, but why don't you call yourself Pinesap, because it gives you a unique identity. It's like that's a unique person, that's an image, that's someone who is kind of set apart from everybody else in terms of like when they hear that name. And so thus the name Pinesap was born.
Amazing. I really like that a lot. I was in a similar boat for myself because for some of my older followers, I used to go under Sola instead of Sola Requiem. And over time, I feel like names, especially for Anons online, evolve, if you will, to where you mess around with some things, you change it, and that's where I am currently. But one theme I've always kept up, because I'm a very big movie buff and I love John Carpenter, all of my PFPs that I've had, you keep going back to the past, the ones I did have, they've all been characters based on John Carpenter movies of my own personal twist I put on them. And currently, a lot of people think my PFP is Christian Bale from American Psycho, and it's actually not him. It's Roddy Piper from They Live. I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum, that guy. But I really respect that too, about you just going in there and creating your own unique identity. And going a bit on that topic, though, I'm curious, when did you get into the whole Groiper scene? Or for the audience at home who haven't heard of a Groiper, what is that?
So Groiper is a follower of Nicholas J. Fuentes in America First. And when I say follower, I don't mean like in a cult or something like that. But what I mean is, someone who's a supporter of Nick and the work that he's doing and the, a movement that he's founded, America First. And America First collectively is understood as a political organization intending to put Christ first and make our nation grand, right? Make our nation better than it's ever been. Because, as we know, America is in a spiritual, a moral, and an economic decline. And, because of a lot of the, outside forces kind of tearing this nation apart, exploiting its resources, trying to change the very population, the very face of who America is, both in a, demographics way and in a, moral and a spiritual characteristic. Nick founded this movement in order to put truly America first, to truly put the interests of Americans and the American people first, with the idea that Christ is king, right? Jesus Christ is king, and that he needs to be the king of all of our lives if we're really to put this country first.
No, beautifully said, and I really agree with that. And for another thing, sorry if I ask this question again, but for the audience at home, because I do have a very large audience from different walks of life, could you give a brief rundown on who Nick Fuentes?
Yeah, so Nick Fuentes, I mean, the biggest thing I would say about him, the two things, is he's a Catholic American patriot, right? He was a gentleman who in recent years had kind of come up through the dissident right. And, for the longest time, he was kind of trying to niche out this place in the dissident right that had not yet existed. Because, prior to Nick and prior to AF, it kind of was really, the right wing in America, at least online and in digital spaces, was kind of split between either the mainstream right, so like Turning Point USA, kind of your neocon types, your am I allowed to say the name of the country on this podcast?
Well, you're allowed to. Feel free to.
Okay, pro-Israel types and stuff like that, not putting America first. And it was like the alt-right. And, the alt-right were frankly degenerate. I mean, a lot of them are like kind of actually evil people. They hate people based on the color of their skin or what have you. It wasn't simply just about wanting to do what was best for white people or having, pride in being white or what have you, but also this kind of like really kind of evil or sinister appeal to them as well. And they simply weren't Christian. I mean, any of the few Christians that were in that organization always would put their Christianity kind of to the side, wouldn't really care about it, wouldn't, live a Christian lifestyle. And so, people were kind of caught in the middle of this. I mean, there were many people who recognized like there's massive problems on the mainstream right. There's massive moral decay. There's massive just spiritual problems or what have you. And I'm most certainly not a fan of those. But, if I go to the alt-right, it's like full of these people who, at best are just like not very functional in how they approach politics and kind of fly by the seat of their pants, are very impulsive, and at worst are just straight up kind of evil, like just not good people in general. And, here Nick comes and he says, look, I am not, for this pro-Israel first, watering down social conservative values, mainstream right. And I'm also not about putting Christ last and, having sort of this hateful, unchristian view that characterizes the alt-right. I am America first, and I believe that Jesus Christ is king. And so, as a result, from really sort of 2017 onward, Nick kind of started off in smaller and smaller spaces, on RSBN. That's where he had his show originally. And then they pulled the plug on it when he got a little too hot and heavy for their tastes, right? So from there, he started his show America First, or America First, of course, had started, I believe, on RSBN, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly. But, that's where he became kind of his own, after RSBN, his own independent show on YouTube, and was doing that for kind of a couple years. And he would go on different platforms like the Kill Stream and stuff like that. If any of you guys remember the name James Alsup, he had a show with him for a while, but James Alsup kind of started to descend further into kind of the alt-right and like the TRS crowd, the right side crowd and stuff like that, and just became more and more degenerate. So they had a break and a split over that. And Nick just kept on going along with his show America First. And as time went on, he got banned from YouTube because of what he spoke about. So then he was on D Live, but then D Live banned him. So then he was on Trovo. And eventually it got to the point where, he's like, I got to have my own streaming platform to really get the message out there. So I think originally, I am an old head, but I'm trying to remember the exact name. I think it was just AmericaFirst.live, and it was only Nick. But then he was like, well, all my buddies, all my friends are, also kind of vying for a free speech platform of, similar cadence and mind in this America First space. So, he started cozy.tv. And from there, the Groyper movement, the America First movement has just burgeoned forth. I mean, Nick got this nickname in the old days when he used to do a bunch of debates with either like alt-right people or mainstream right people, Nick the Knife, because he was such a just great debater. He could just cut through any argument, and there wasn't really a single debate that he ever lost. And I think from there and all the controversy it generated and sort of for lack of a better term, the cult of personality that formed around him was all because he's just a really sincere guy. He cares about what he believes in. He's willing to suffer for it. And he believes and suffers for the right thing, which is Jesus. Ultimately, at its core, is Jesus Christ. And, because he suffers for our Lord, he, of course, cares about the fate of this country and wants to, in every way, shape, and form, do what is best for it. And so that's kind of his origin and what have you. But, I mean, since then, he's just popped off. He met with Kanye, and Kanye, completely shifted the Overton window on a lot of particular questions and stuff like that. And there's been this whole cultural shift in the right. And I will go so far as to say I solely credit it to, because, there were other people, sure, that were, maybe talking about some America First policy, some paleocon ideas and stuff like that had been around since like Patrick Buchanan and that sort of thing. But he was the only guy who I think took those ideas, had a charming, witty personality to boot, and presenting them and created a real sort of culture that I feel like all these young men, these young, especially Catholic men in America, could feel like they really jived with. And that's what has ultimately led to the success of this movement.
And what I love, yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I remember when I found out about Nick, it was actually through James Allsup, and I think it was when he got banned from Twitter.
When James got banned?
Started to listen to America First when it was still on YouTube. And I during this time, I was also very much into looking into the past sort of conservative movements like that of Buchanan stuff, and something about Nick just kept watching the streams that he did, at least the streams that were on YouTube at that time. And this was close to the time where you had the war, where you get all these sort of, I found it to be.
I still remember the clip of opening up for that TPUSA thing with Charlie Kirk, and they all start throwing questions at him. And you're slowly seeing Charlie going from that smug look on his face where he has those gum teeth that he always has, that weird smile, to slowly watching it fade. He's like, oh crap, these are all going to be the same people asking these questions. I can't dodge them all. And it made him look horrible, and it really put Groypers on the map, definitely. But going off what you were saying too, Pinesap, especially for people like myself who got into politics and came to more religious and philosophical views, it's interesting watching the evolution of the right wing, because there's always been the behemoth that is TPUSA and Daily Wire, these guys who are neocon. And then on the other side, I'm sure you remember it, you're talking about it, you only had these weird right-wing nihilists is the best way I could describe them, Nick, Richard Spencer, for example, was one guy. A lot of these dudes who are just everything's screwed, what about it, just only care about yourself, all these weird views. And then Nick was truly the only person to cut through and be an actual cult personality, like you said, and say hey, it's not so over, we're actually so back, and keep fighting for something. While these other guys, even now recently, BAP and the whole BAP sphere, just very niching and nihilistic. Well, we're just going to do whatever we want. Nick genuinely cares about people and about America being taken care of, and that's something I respect about him a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you don't lose your banking and you don't get put on the no-fly list if you don't. And that's the biggest thing. It's I always laugh when people are like, oh, he's a grifter. I mean, look, what money is there to be made in this industry where you're getting, blacklisted from every podcast? People don't want to have you on. People don't want to discuss with you and stuff like that. These relevant issues and topics about, who's really controlling America, and why is everything degenerating so fast in this country, and what's happening in the makeup of of the fabric of America, right? And it's all these people will be like, oh, he's a grifter. And it's dude, there's no money to make in that, right? There's no money to make in, being a pariah and kind of being just blacklisted by the entire right wing.
Yeah, and it really irritates me too, seeing how I feel very unfamous. Where, perfect example, when I go on my show, immediately I got a good 3 or 4 messages who were prior guests on the show. People who I could say I'm mutual acquaintance with saying like, oh, don't get Pinesap on. He's one of those like, guys. He's one of those like, it's gonna make you look bad. And I'm like, so what? It's my podcast. I like who I want to have on whoever I have on. Like, I'm not gonna like cower away because someone says don't have this. I think it's very silly and stupid. But
no, it's unfortunate. I mean, sometimes people will have. I'm always amazed. I've always challenged people who kind of say those types of things to like, hey, let's have a discussion or what have you, and they always seem to kind of cower away. But then they'll kind of go behind your back and be like, oh, this person's actually bad, or this person you shouldn't talk to, and it's like, I think it's just unfortunate. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you've always been super kind to me, and I always appreciate whenever I'm seeing your Twitter posts and stuff like that. And it's like, don't we all want to fight for the same thing? I mean, if we love and believe Jesus Christ and we want what's best for this country, why is there this sort of, I don't know, why is there this animosity? Yes, that's what I want.
Understand it as like, I don't want to be like trying to be carbon copy. Like, obviously, I want us to have some core axioms, and that is being that, Christ is Lord, Christ is King. So, although at times, like, let's say I could disagree with Catholic, like, Twitter or right-wing Twitter, I'm not going to, like, disband from them because I don't like what they said. As soon as be like, okay, I know we both at the core mean well, and we both, like, care about this thing, and we're trying to, like, help others. But speaking on that, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to mainly just navigating for content creation, has there been any lessons you made that you'd wish you could tell yourself, like you now tell yourself when you first got, like, hey, make sure to look out for these signs when associating with people, make sure to like make you do this more? Is there anything you'd tell your older self?
Oh man, I could write maybe at this point. I'm only 2 years really doing this, and I feel like I could write a book at this point. Like, the thing about online is a lot faster, guys, right? I mean, I know you guys probably wait, like, 2 years feels sometimes like 5, right? And 5 years feels like 10. And you can almost take the amount of time that you're in the online sphere and double it by all intents. And, I've had a crazy 2 years. I mean, I have entire people that I used to be friends with and I used to talk on the regular that, I don't even know where they are anymore. I had people who were mentors to me or really just one person who was a mentor to me and I really looked up to, and he basically excommunicated me from his life. Right. I've had people have, stabbed me in the back. I've had people on me. I've had all kinds of sometimes unfortunately negative experiences, but I think the main thing through content creation is, and I think this is just kind of a principle of life in general, is you should know your friends. I mean, you should know the people that at the end of the day, if you were to turn off the camera and you were to stop like making all content, would this person still care about you? Would this person still want to be involved in your life? Would this person still text you, dude, are you doing okay? Are you having it? Is everything in life going great right now? Let's hang out. Let's, spend time together. Right. And those people in your life who act as a catalyst for love, truly caring about you, you need to hold them closer than diamonds, dude. I mean, those people are very, very rare, especially when we're kind of anonymous online. But, I do have a couple of them that I can think about the top of my head. Like, even if I was to lose all popularity or all relevance tomorrow, they would still be my friend. And I think that every single online content creator needs people like that, because if you don't have people like that, it's a very lonely. I would say that's probably the thing I would tell myself is, those who do truly care about you, even if you might butt heads with them sometimes, even if you might have a bad day with them, keep those who care about you in this space of content creation. It goes without saying in your IRL life, but especially in this sphere, like those who are online with you or maybe even no IRL, but work with you or what have you, you need to keep them very close to you because they're very precious. And, there's a lot of other things I could say. I mean, another thing that I think I would probably mention is, sometimes be careful, speaking ill of other people. I've caught myself a couple times speaking very ill of other people. And, someone would then reach out to me and be like, hey, man, I didn't think we had an issue. Like, why did you say that about me? And I always put my foot in my mouth after. I'm like, why did I say that, dude? Like, I mean, I'll give an example. Like I was making fun of like Trad West, like a couple streams ago, a couple months ago. And I was making jokes about him on a stream and stuff like that. And he, reached out through like a mutual friend of ours, and he's like, hey man, well, I've never had a problem with Pinesap. Like, I don't understand why he's treating me. And honestly, like my heart dropped. I read that. Like, I was like, you know what? I was such a jerk, and he never did anything wrong to me. He was always a nice guy. He was always charitable. He's doing a great thing online. And I was just an unhinged jerk, right, in the way that I treated him. And I think it was a really good moment for me to learn, like, you need to be really careful about the way that you treat other people, because that says a lot about you more than any other act that you.
No, definitely. And I could relate, especially with, I'm sure you already know, you get enough followers, meet a lot of people. And it's one of those things where I could unfortunately say I did bridges that I regret. Hit up these people, but like, man, I'm sorry about that. You got to keep moving. But that's one main thing I'd agree with. Be careful not to burn bridges. It's really the people you hang out with, people you should trust. As definitely your, like, an example, I guess, personal life is that I'm in Georgia and I have a group chat from other Catholics of mine who are in Georgia. We're in the same archdiocese. So it's about like close to like 20 of the guys if I want to go, dudes I trust. And
oh yeah. Well, and those are people who you can always turn to when, you need them the most. Those are people you can always trust. And, that they have your back at the end of the day, no matter what happens. And like I said, I mean, those people are worth their weight in gold. Like, never downplay the importance of those people in your life.
definitely. And a question I wanted to ask, but it's coming back to me now. When it comes to being, but also having a rich knowledge of like political stuff that's going on, does it feel like a tightrope walk almost, where it's like you're trying to balance as well? Because there's times where you've met them where you butt heads with people, myself included, who I would disagree a lot with their faith, but they're of this. Like, how do you navigate through that, knowing like, okay, does this live up to Christ or vice versa? Like, is this helping people?
I think the biggest thing that I try to keep in mind is, I don't necessarily disavow people if they're very sincere about their faith, because the main thing that will lead to me ever disavowing someone or not wanting to associate with them, and I don't care, frankly, what their politics are, the moment they say something heterodox, right, like they might deny a certain teaching or what have you emphatically, that's the moment I do cut ties and I say, okay, this is not someone who I want to be involved with. But regarding political differences, I mean, the biggest thing I would say is if someone believes the Orthodox Catholic faith, if someone holds to Catholic orthodoxy, and I see the sincerity of that, and maybe they're not red pilled on like KQ or something like that, I don't throw them under the bus per se, right? I mean, a good example is like Trent Horn. He has most certainly said some things that I'm like, kind of roll my eyes about with that prior issue that I just mentioned, like the JQ or what have you. But at the end of the day, I acknowledge he's faithful Orthodox Catholic. He loves Jesus with all his heart. And it would be stupid to just like, not that he knows me at all or anything like that, but, it'd be stupid to look at someone like that and just say, well, you're a reprobate, or you're someone who I can't regard in any positive light whatsoever. And it's like, that's simply not true. I think for me, it just comes down to, where is someone's heart at? I mean, for instance, I am openly a white identitarian. I want, what is best for my race, not to the detriment of any other race of people. Of course not. That's completely against Catholic teaching, but, I'm pro-white, and I'm proud to say that. And, sometimes people have been like, I don't really understand why you bring that up or what have you, but they're not like throwing me under the bus. And then, there was someone the other day who said, well, oh, your race was a bunch of retards before the missionaries came or something like that. And it's like, that's someone that I blocked, because I was like, this is someone who wants to be insulting. This is someone who wants to be derogatory. And frankly, that person's a bigot and a racist. And I have no interest in interacting with someone like that. I wish him well. I want the best for him. But, it's the difference between where is someone's heart at, I think, when maybe they approach a disagreement that we have. And, do they have a sincere desire to say, well, hey, man, maybe we disagree on this, but like, I know where your heart's at. You're a faithful Catholic at the end of the day. And I know you regard me the same way, and I still love you like a brother. Or, do they tear you down and try to, slander you or something like that?
No, exactly. 100%. A question I wanted to add it, but what eventually led you? Was it influenced by political theorists or Nick Fuentes, a lot of these things? Or where did you, like, I guess, form a lot?
So for me, a lot of my politics kind of came from, it actually came from Gamergate. I mean, Gamergate was like the big event that, you know, got any sort of political consciousness raised in my mind. Because you know, before then, politics always seemed like this distant, like, it was Mitt Romney debating Obama on each, right? And it was like low taxes. And, you know, how does this really affect me? Like, I just want to live my life. I just want to major, what have you. But then it went from being that to then, you know, 2015 and 2016 hits, and there's the election, and Gamergate hits, and there's this whole dispute. And suddenly I hear this people saying, well, gamers are horrible neo-Nazi pieces of crap that need to die. They need to, you know, log off forever. They're horrible. And I'm over here offended because I'm like, what? Dude, I'm not even political in any way, shape, or form. I'm just a kid. I like playing video games. I don't want my video games to be like censored or have anything weird done to them. Like, I just want to enjoy my you know, hobby that allows me to kind of socialize with my friends, connect, have an entire community that I'm part of. You know, even at this time, it mattered a lot to me because I wanted to be a game developer. And so, you know, here I'm seeing this entire group of people who are, you know, attacking something that I really love and care about. And I'm like, okay, well, even just reflexively, even defensively, I'm like, I guess I got to get politically involved. And so, you know, I started watching sort of the early coverage of like Gamergate and, you know, people talking about that and sort of addressing that topic. But then it slowly started to get deeper when I realized, like, these people don't just hate the video games that I like to play. Like, these people like hate my family. They hate my ancestry. They hate my civilization. Like, they want to see all that destroyed. And I'm like, okay, well, I care about those things. Like, I'm like, even if I lost the video at the end of the day, like, there's no replacing the people in my life. There's no replacing my family or my ancestry or my heritage or where I grew up or my civilization. So I'm like, reflexively, I want to defend that. And as a result of wanting to defend that, I'm like, well, what is my culture? What is my heritage? And, you know, I started to sort of read up on politics and become more religious as a result, because I was like, there's clearly something demonic going on here. This isn't just some like naturalist phenomenon. This is a deeper spiritual problem that is kind of driving this. And the more and more I started to get involved in that kind of line of thinking, I was reading like a lot of different political theorists and what they had to say. And consistently, I came to this conclusion that, you know, all the Catholic writers that I was reading were kind of the best ones. I mean, they were all the people who would always deliver the best answers. They were never into like separation of church and state, which I already, when I was in high school, saw as being a big problem. I'm like, there should be no separation between church and state. You know, there should be no separation between the spiritual and the political. And, you know, as a result, that's, you know, inevitably how I came into, you know, believing in our faith, how I became Catholic, was seeing that only Catholicism had a bulk of addressing the separation between the spiritual and the temporal. And every other, you know, political theorist, Protestant or otherwise, was still into these kind of like liberal ideas that I saw leading to the decline of Western civilization. And so, you know, I kept going down that road, and I was reading like quite a bit of like Edmund Burke, like just excerpts from them, or like, you know, articles written on their thought, right, of like Edmund Burke, Joseph Damast, and kind of a couple other like kind of counter-revolutionary, very early conservative figures. And, you know, by that point, I had a kind of a beautiful spiritual patrimony. But the last question within that was the question of race, because, you know, from a young age, I was kind of taught like, well, not so much from my parents, but in the school system, like, well, being white doesn't anything. It's just melanin. It's just, or it's just a lack of, I believe it's a lack of melanin, not melanin. And, you know, it's just a skin color. It doesn't mean anything. Right. And, you know, when you're taught that as a young man, you almost become kind of humiliated, because you feel guilty to like look on your forebears and draw inspiration. You feel like, oh, I'm going to be those people during Jim Crow who carried the dogs and stayed the fire hose to the people fighting for like equal rights, or right. And you're instilled with that kind of guilt. But suddenly when I got to late high school, early college, I remember watching this video almost like it was yesterday. And it was of when Tommy Robinson was If you guys remember that kind of
Yeah,
whole
I
debacle,
remember that one.
he was arrested. And it was a video titled "I Am in England." And, I click on that video and I'm sitting there, and here is this beautiful monologue. It's still one of those beautiful speeches I've ever heard to this day, of this man talking about how people live and breathe on in, his race is not just a skin color. It's not just what he happened to end up with. It's not like a used hand-me-down, but it's a tapestry of who he is. It's part of the very nature of who and every single ancestor and every single person who has ever lived lives on in him. And he is a living, breathing collection, a living, breathing tapestry of all their hopes, aims, and their desires. And when I thought of race like that for the first time in my life, I'm like, I am a white man. And I'm not only just a white man, but I'm proud to be. And it was almost like I saw a whole different dimension of who I was. And I'm not ashamed to say it even made me want to be Catholic that much more, because I saw in this great eschaton of Western civilization, the whole decline of my race came from the fact that we turned away from God. We turned away from his church. We were led out of the church. We're led into atheism and superstition by a fat, drunk king who just wanted to, take another wife. And before, I'm like, what happened to the England of St. Augustine of Canterbury and St. Tarcisius? And this high culture that dominated the waves and, painted this entire world that was full of, things like law and justice and human dignity. What happened to that race? And I suddenly saw that the core theme was the closer my people walked with God, the closer my people walked with Jesus Christ, who came to redeem all men, all races, all nations, because all of mankind is one family. I realized that, Jesus is the fulfillment of all these things. And from there, I had a full consciousness of what it meant to be Catholic and what it meant to be white.
No, that's very beautiful, Sam. That's what I love for myself as well. I'm a Catholic reader. For a while, I listened to. I was going about it's like pseudo. First, I was like pretty atheist on a lot of things, and a lot like Richard Spencer types, where it's like doesn't matter. I'll just do whatever I want. I don't care if people get. And then you just feel the guilt weigh of like all these things that happen because of your actions, and eventually you're like, okay, I want to like look deeper into like who you are, who I am as a person. And that's why I got really blessed for my family to have a pretty long background in knowing history of who we are. And I was able to see the beauty in my mother's side, where my family were Spaniards who exploring everywhere, like taking stuff, actually doing things. I thought that was like really cool. There was like vitality in that. And on the other hand, I look over at my father's side where it's, Russians who came over eventually to Poland and settled there for a while. And I just see so much rich history, and to sit here and listen to other people tell me about my own ancestors, I'm like, why am I trusting other people over trusting my own ancestors, trusting my own bloodline? And I hate to say this, and it's too mad at me saying this, but in a way, it felt like straight up race trader. Like, I'm like, wow, I feel like a race trader listening to what other people instead of listening to if that makes any sense.
Well,
It's
the admiration in someone who advocates. I mean, Malcolm X, don't get me wrong, he did a lot of evil things and thought a lot of evil stuff, but why is he enduring for Black people in America? It's because, he wanted the true betterment of Black people. He wanted to make Black people conscious of a deeper culture and history that they have, right? And that's why he's kind of an enduring figure amongst Black Americans. And for white people, it's like, why do white people look up to someone like George Washington, some of the founding fathers or what have you? It's not simply just the Turning Point USA. Well, everyone pulls out their, pocket constitution and reads off of it. It's like, no, your ancestors came here on the Mayflower. They settled this new land. They conquered the wilderness, all with the old land, the old nation in their hearts, building something new, but always carrying the old and never departing from it. And when you start to understand it in a civilizational scale, you see how silly it is when people deny race. When they say, well, that's racist. You can't talk about how, there's different people groups or what have you, as if when you say that, you're denying that we're still a part of all the one human family redeemed by the sacred blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's like, no, Catholics had no problem even a generation ago speaking this way. And it's that, people who hate us and hate our religion have started to dictate the language by which we speak of our ancestors and of our religion. And that just really ticks me off, to be
Yeah,
No,
that was
exactly. Yeah, John.
I remember back in 2016, like I was kind of seeing a lot of like the sort of the self-hating sort of white people, and I kind of thought there was a point where I thought getting a bit far to the extent that it be like very suicidal, and I thought that like that was part of the reason why I had a bit of I get a focus on like politics, immigration, mostly not like a lot of it had to do with like most people just approaching the matter of immigration like either is a trivial thing, so long as you're kind of like like a hold to American values, then you are an American. And then the question is like, like, well, okay, so American values and all train track of like, at the end of the day, a nation that has to kind of like that wants to survive needs to have appreciate their heritage. They need to have of their history without necessarily just trying to merely pick and choose what it is that they like about it. I mean, that's kind of like the most people are trying to sort of approach that. And yeah, like for the longest of time, like this wasn't like it's the whole thing about like the idea that America really that's not sufficient enough. Simply speaking about ideas as if they open that is interchangeable for every
And that's the thing
like that.
about liberalism too. Liberalism is just you could sit around all day, talk about things, but you can't do anything past talk. So
Yeah,
keep sitting there and just keep talking, but don't take in our stuff.
yeah,
Because after all, we're a big melting pot here, folks. You can't do it. It's just
yeah,
ridiculous. I'm like, this
and
is
and
stupid.
it's
the
just
guy.
problematic. Really, what you eventually get with this, are like cities, pretty much that's where it's going to get you. And most people, at least most people who are sane enough to understand those, who have seen what happens in there, wouldn't want to live or raise their children.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it's so funny too because liberalism. I was reading Venerable Sheen talking about like the mystical body of the and liberalism. If it is not the forebearer of the mystical body of the Antichrist, it most certainly is either that mystical body or it's playing a role in its creation, where no longer do you become united by the Catholic Church and you still are all of the one faith, Jesus Christ, as a part of the human family. But in that family, as I've always said and explained sort of racial consciousness in the Catholic in how the church regards it, a family does not have identical members, meaning, a mother is not a father and a father is not a son and a son is not a daughter or a brother, et cetera, right? They all play their individual role. And if the human family is a part of the church, then we all are united in this one mystical body of Jesus Christ, yet still be, have our special traits not destroyed, but kept and maintained. But liberalism doesn't shy away from doing exactly the opposite. It's like it has to destroy in order to create a false unity that, because Satan can't create anything. He has to just destroy what's already there and corrupt it in order to create sort of the unity of the church. But in this false satanic way, it seeks to destroy every difference. It seeks to make every nation a McDonald's, make every nation a highway. Say, well, you're all equal, so that means any individuality, any individual characteristic is an affront against this mystical body of the Antichrist. It really is kind of one of the most satanic things I could ever fathom.
It's very paradoxical, homogenized effect through like talk of diverse individuals. That's what I mean. It's usually like it's very and it's hard at first to kind of like explain because it is paradoxical behind most of like this thing that most what people present really wise and all. It's ultimately just and when I say homogenized at the top down level, merely like sort of a spontaneous phenomenon we have been experiencing. I always kind of point out that like when you look at the last 70 years of politics, nothing is merely like bottom up. There's always some top down effect in regards to the way that the culture from like nations that have influence idea in the masses, and also because you had other institutions who finance. So there is definitely like liberalism isn't merely at least like some spontaneous phenomena in our culture. It is something that being perpetuated by by like our media institute. Like there is a sort of a maybe not a formalized like core. It definitely doesn't come from like people just like being enlightened like out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
And that's something you notice a lot with like left-wing politics, how they have such an emphatic need to melt everything down and remove anything objective, where to the point they can't even decide what is in order. Like, okay, race is a social construct, gender is a social construct, everything's a social construct, you know? And it's just weird. They're like, oh, you can't have pride in your culture, your people, your nation, because we're all the same in this. I'm like, well, yeah, I believe in imago. I believe that everyone a basic level of decency and respect for their being human. But at what point do you draw the line and just say like, "Hey, this is my people. I'm proud of my people more of theirs," or "This is my nation. I'm proud of my nation more than your nation." Like, if you're an American, you should be saying America is the greatest country in the world. Even if it's not, you should say that because that's your country you're representing. Same if I was in Brazil, I'd be saying, you know, Brazil's the greatest country in the world if I was living there or whatever country.
No, I mean, it completely makes sense. And it's one of those things where, you know, the liberal tries to create this animosity between having identity and or rather this part and parcel, I should rather say, between having your identity and somehow hating because you're not that other identity. So, you know, for the liberal, it's like, okay, well, you say you're proud to be white, so that must mean you hate black people. And you say, well, where does the question of hate ever enter in this discussion? They say, well, because you're not black. So therefore, if you're not black and you must love, you know, your race, which happens to be not black, it must mean that you hate being black. And, you know, the whole question that they try to arise, or the whole line of thought that they try to arise with this, you know, completely fallacious straw man that they've crafted in their wicked mind, ultimately boils down to this analogy of, or not boils down, rather is destroyed by this analogy of, you know, family. Like, if I have my family, right, I have the Pinesap family. Well, even though the Pinesap family isn't the Johnsons or the Smiths or the Michaels or what have you, this other family, and I love my family more than these other families, it doesn't mean that I hate those other. And really, the dichotomy between to love others who happen to be a different racial identity or what have you, and you know, well, if loving others, you know, necessitates that you know you care about them, that means you have to have a suicidal attitude to your own race and your own people. Or if you have a healthy love of your own race and your own people, it means necessarily you have to will the destruction of other races. It has been kind of a false, like a false like thought construct that we're all suffering.
All right, guys, we're now back on the show, and we've covered a bit about politics. Now we're going to move over some to more Pinesap's personal journey, some of the faces he's met along the way. So, first question I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Christian Wagner? How'd you meet the guy? How did all that happen? Because you guys seem to click pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting discussion. You know, at first I was kind of on the periphery of Christian community and stuff like that. And, you know, there were times where like I had gotten word, oh, this guy is like a strict Thomist and stuff like that. And his, you know, his guys will like, you know, just dogpile on you for, you know, this or that if you depart from St. Thomas or what have you. And, you know, I would kind of at the very beginning when I didn't really know him go back and forth on my opinion of him. But when I got to meet him, like I just realized like what it like honestly like a great dude and like saintly guy he is, and how much he gave me honestly like a real love for St. Thomas Aquinas. Because St. Thomas Aquinas, you oftentimes kind of hear him brought up, you hear his name dropped all the time, and you know he's regarded as extremely intelligent, but you know sometimes it's kind of St. Thomas is brought up sometimes sadly in a like dry way. Like he's kind of just depicted as this very intellectual saint or what have you, but you know, people don't show, I think, like the spiritual side of his or how, you know, his answers in the Summa directly connect to sort of our mystic. I think really being influenced by Christian Wagner and getting to read more of like St. Thomas, especially recently, I've been reading more of his like, you know, answers from the Summa, like deification and stuff like that, theosis. It's given me a real love for St. Thomas and just Thomism as a soul of Catholic philosophy in general that I never would have imagined.
Yeah, I really love it. And some of the two channels I like, or three, is yours, Classical Theism, Christian Wagner. But it's kind of funny because Christian Wagner, I haven't had the privilege yet to talk to the guy. And Unfortunately, he gets me when I'm like shit posting online where I'm not being serious, and I think he thinks I'm serious. And he'll comment under there like, "Dude, what the fuck? I'm sorry, man. It's not like that."
You're
But
like, I'm just trolling, dude. Don't
yeah, I was like,
worry.
I'm just trolling right now. Like, and then he's like, "Oh, look at this guy." No, Wagner, love you, man. But
No, he's awesome.
besides that, have you ever thought about doing collabs with him, or have you done any in the past?
Oh, I've done a ton with them. I mean, we've done a ton of streams together. We did a really good stream where actually me and Jay Dyer reconciled. It was a beautiful moment. And like totally like any past we had is like totally behind us. Like I regard him very highly now and stuff like that. And we've had a lot of beautiful moments together. We've done like quite a bit of streams on like the RH question, the religious hippie question, her posting selfies of herself online. And it's like, okay, like come on, like, you know, you can talk about Catholic topics or whatever, but do we really need to see the like just got out of mass, you know, selfie kind of pic? You know, it's like that's just not appropriate. We don't need to see that on the timeline, right? But
So many Catholic moms are like, "Oh, I love Catholicism and all, but I draw the line at this incel stuff." I'm like, it's not that. You're missing the point here. You know, there's a bigger picture at the moment.
well, yeah, and that's the whole thing with like incel thing. Like, we're not literally saying for guys to not get married, right? Getting married is completely important, and getting married is key. But you know, if you sort of like put women on this pedestal that they don't belong, you start to like worship them, and you start to like the sun rises in their direction, do no wrong, they're always correct. And I think really like the death of this attitude, and I'm not happy to see what happened that caused this. So I don't want to say I'm happy to that this happened because a very horrible and sad event pertained it. So I'm really kind of not. But you know, Lottie, right? That like, you know, Jewish, like pro-life chick or whatever, who I didn't really know too much about her. I think I had heard her name brought up before or whatever. But when, you know, she went and she just like, you know, killed her child, and there were these people on the timeline who were like, oh, she's in so much pain right now. She's suffering so much or what have you. All of us were over here caring about the child. You know, who's caring about the kid? The kid is who was just murdered. And here you have this like this e-girl who, you know, everyone, she's like unrepentantly not sad about just murdering her child. And everyone is like coddling her and acting like she's a victim and stuff like that. And, you know, I was telling my friend this the other day. I think it really was like where the whole like e-girl kind of sim culture that, you know, us incels were fighting against for a long time really like jumped the shark. Because I mean, there were many people who took issue with us calling ourselves incels who even were on the timeline being like, yo, like, I never want to hear her name again. She's evil, right? Like, she's an evil woman and like she's wicked for what she has done. And, you know, no one should feel sorry for her. She's completely unrepentant and stuff like that. And I really think it was at that moment that kind of like the simp culture that had been created around e-girls, especially in like the right wing, had kind of broken down, excuse me.
And I'm going to talk briefly on people, but the Lottie situation, the religious hippie one, I found fun. Where I'm like, okay, it's about time. You know, someone actually said what we're all thinking. Basically,
Oh, for sure.
the Lottie one just straight up pissed me off because I actually have a handful of friends who are involved in the whole, you know, March for Life, pro-life movement. And I remember sending that to one of my friends who was actually close to Lottie. And then I'm like, hey, what is this? And then she's like, oh, her response to me was like, you wouldn't understand the struggles of a woman going through right now. And I just told her, like, yeah, because I'd never kill my own child. Like, I'm sorry, like, what do you want me to do? Feel sad that she killed her kid? Like, that's not something I'm gonna like think about, like, oh man, I wish Lottie wasn't so rough. Like, this is why would you do that in the first place? Especially people who you are pro-life. Like, and when I ask them about that, like, what's going on with this, their knee-jerk response is to defend her, be like, oh, she's going through a lot right now, you know. I'm like, what? Like, I've known you for years. You've been very pro-life, and then now you're flipping because it's someone you know. And you're like, oh, yeah, but not her, though. You know, give her a pass. I'm like, it just sucks.
It shows the complete lack of intent is really what it is. And, you know, I mean, here's the thing, like with like the religious hippie, like, you know, yes, our criticism of her, like post pictures of herself and stuff like that is serious, but like none of us think she's or whatever. I don't think she's like a wicked woman or anything like that. It's totally like it's totally kind of like one of those things where like, yes, we are making a legitimate point with her doing that kind of stuff, but like we don't think she's like an evil woman or anything like that by any means, right? We don't have sort of a disproportionate attitude to, what she's doing. It is just a picture at the end of the day. No one's getting like ultimately hurt by it per se. But with someone like Lottie, it's like she literally murdered a child. She killed a child. And if this was some, Catholic dude who had, pressured his girlfriend into having an abortion or whatever, oh my goodness, can you imagine
he'd be crucified? Yeah, he'd be out of it.
You would. And instead, it's like, everyone rushed to her defense. The e-girl cries, and everyone just rushes to her defense and says, oh, well, this was because mean groypers bullied her because she was Jewish and stuff like that, which, by the way, she was never serious about looking Catholicism. I've looked back on that like whole timeline. That is some grade A. I mean,
it's a wolf in sheep's clothing is what it is. Like, okay, I'm going to wear the skin of it just so I can blend into people. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not that. You're not Catholic. But
she really was not. And I mean, I'll be honest. I pegged her instantly as being this. She was a Judaizer, right? She was one of these, people from a Jewish background who, they come in and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I want to be Catholic, but also you have to make all these special allowances for me because I'm Jewish and I don't really want to actually convert. I kind of still want to be basically Jewish and Catholic at the same time. And Catholics like, look, if someone was actually making fun of someone because they came from a Jewish background and were mistreating them as a result of that, I would be I'd be one of the first people to speak up against that. Just like if they were Protestant, just like if they were atheist or Eastern Orthodox, someone trying to hold a sinful path against them. But, it's like some of these like Jewish people, it's like they come in and it's like, oh, I want every in sync. I want to be Catholic, but that's not how this works.
You mentioning that reminds me is Redeemed Zoomer, which I love that dude to death. Like, obviously, I wish he wasn't just be Catholic already. There's so many times he's just this close, but like, I think it was a month or two ago that someone figured out that he's like ethnically like Jewish, which I'm pretty sure he's mentioned prior. And then I was just watching as always people were dogging him, being like saying things like, shut up, you're like evil just for like you being existing. And I felt bad for the guy because like, look, Redeemed Zoomer, I could say him many things, but one thing I won't call him is him being, actually Jenny, because I feel like that guy genuinely cares. Like, I don't think he'd be doing what he's doing this long if he didn't care about it. But that's just a frustrating thing. And like, hey, Redeem, like, love you, man. I'm sorry you get dogpiled sometimes. It gets frustrating. That's all I'm going to get at.
Well, and people don't make the distinction between, there are people who do legitimately treat someone just because they happen to come from a Jewish background. And that's satanic. That's not of the Lord, right? Again, and that's not special for Jews. That's for everybody. I wouldn't mistreat someone if they came from an atheist background and were sincerely converting. I wouldn't mistreat someone if they came from a Lutheran background and they were seriously considering converting, right? But, Redeemed Zoomer has spoken against the Arianism. He has shown a lot of integrity. He has shown a lot of zeal in emphasizing there's only salvation in Jesus Christ. And that is not someone who is a Judaizer, right? Judaizers, I mean, I love them, and I mean this with all respect, but like the Jewish Catholic guy, it's like celebrating Hanukkah and stuff like that. Like, you're not Jewish anymore. You're Catholic, right? And I think he wants to be sincere about his faith, and I don't think he's like evil or necessarily malicious, but it's like there comes a time in conversion where you have to give up the things of a child. You have to give the things up of your past. I had to do the thing as an Anglican. I got rid of my books of common prayer. I don't own them anymore. I gave up a lot of, spiritual writings or books from Anglicans that, I would have owned prior. I threw away, my Buddhist prayer flags and my statues of Buddha, right? Like, there were things that I had to part with because they were not of the Lord. And, that is something that Redeemed Zoomer, I think, has always emphasized and what have you, and certainly makes him not a Judaist.
No, definitely. And if anyone says that they convert, I'm not trying to sound rude here, but I genuinely don't believe. And the reason I say that is like, even me, like, from actually taking the faith serious, I noticed, unfortunately, if anyone who's Spanish, in the area of the Caribbean, Santeria is a very big thing there. That's our version of voodoo. And unfortunately, it is deeply seeped in all of our culture, from things that you wear and things that you have in your house that you don't think of a second time until you actually read into it. Like I had to give up a lot of things like that I was always had my whole life. Like, I used to wear a necklace for was the Aztec eye, and I had that on me forever. And after a while learning about it, I just became utterly disgusted of it. Like, why am I wearing this thing? And it's stuff like that that you do have to let go eventually if you're going to actually take it serious, whether it be what music you listen to, how you act, all these things like that. It's not easy. No one says it's going to be.
No, and no one says it's going to be easy, but it's because Jesus loves us. And, what the Father is so much greater than any of the things we leave behind. And, what I hate to say it, but when we show attachment to those things that we're supposed to leave behind, well, what else are they but idols? I mean, what else are they but idols in our lives that make us say, Lord, I love you. I care about you, but this thing matters so much to me that I can't hardly think of parting with. And at that point, the Lord asks, do you really love me? Do you really care about me? If you are so attached to this thing, whatever it may be, that it gets in the way of our relationship, do you love me? And I think that's a question that all of us, even as we convert, we have to ask. I mean, you mentioned like music and culture and stuff like that. Like, I do meet Catholics sometimes who will convert and they're like, well, I really love artists and I think their music is great. And I'm like, yes, but their music is satanic and they talk about satanic imagery and stuff like that. And you have to ask, again, that hard question. Do you love the Lord so much you're willing to give this up?
Exactly. And I've had tons of talks with John here because me and him are both into like heavy metal music. And we talk about how at times it really sucks because a lot of music you used to listen to, like this hardcore, like death metal and stuff, like listening to it again, you're like, oh, this is actually like really satanic and it's not really good for the soul to be like.
No, that wasn't me. I listened to the good wholesome hardcore death metal stuff.
Yeah, only the good wholesome. Like, well, to be fair, I do listen to like basically instruments that aren't doing crazy things like that. But there are some bands, not gonna lie, I do miss. But like Pinesap said, at what point is it something you miss and something that's becoming an idol?
And it, like some of these in the long run are just kind of little sacrifice. You have to sort of kind of what reiterating, like if you're not willing to those small sacrifices, you're not going to be willing to make the other what's going to come down the road. And it's and again, this goes back to just like putting it all on the help you out.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Hey, Pinesap, can I ask you something too? It's on my mind now, but we were talking about people you met along. Who do you think is someone you haven't talked to a while that you want to give a shout out to? Be like, hey, this person helped me out a lot. That people don't really bring up a lot in conversation.
Oh man, dude, that's a tough question. I'm trying to think about like who I haven't talked to in a really that's helped me out. I mean, honestly, I sometimes recently have I've been doing more of my own YouTube stuff or what have you, now Rumble and content and stuff like that. I've kind of lost, touch talking with him as much. But honestly, like Spec Man, like, whenever I need something, like Spexo has always been there for me. He's always, cared for me and cared about me. He's always made an effort to reach out. He's always made an effort to talk to me, when times were tough and what have you. And, he's always been my brother. And, I mean, that might seem cliche to be like, oh, well, of course he's your friend. Like, what are you talking about? But I really don't think that like I emphasize enough, like how big of a role that he has played in my life. Like, he really changed the trajectory of my entire life and, gave me a opportunity to do something that I for the first time in my life have really loved doing. Like doing all this online stuff, I would not put this much time, this much energy, this much effort into it if I didn't love doing it. And I have probably him alone and the Lord to credit for leading me down this path that I found myself in this crazy game we call life.
Definitely. And hey, maybe I can get him on a show sometime with you. That'd be nice.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, dude. I'd totally be down with that.
Yeah.
All right. Can I ask my dumb questions?
Yeah, of course.
What's up, John?
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned before, the papacy stuff is really not my strongest. It's really one of those subjects where I'm most underdeveloped next to like the historicity of the canon, and so like, what would you say to someone who like let's say has never start off like something under 20 pages at first, if not, just...
well, I'm not sure how short this book is. I'd have to page count for it again, but there's a beautiful book by Steve Ray. Actually, it's literally just called The Paper. And what's beautiful about it is, it's not a super long apologetical book. It is apologetics, but it's, very like introductory, approaching, kind of not babies first, but, sort of like the very bare bones fundamentals of, what we believe about the office of. And I love that book because it's not super heavy in terms of its theological delivery. So it's a very, very accessible book for anyone who's like just getting into learning about, a ton of church history yet. You don't need to know a ton about that element of our faith. And it's just a great way to kind of have that very easy and simple introduction into, why did Christ institute the office of the Pope to be the visible head of the entire church? Like, what's the significance of that? So I really think that book is probably Stephen Ray's The Papacy.
Yeah, because currently I am still going through this work that is titled Faith Comes from What Is Heard, An Introduction to Fundamental Theology, but Fine Go. Third part, not the apostolic, after kind of like the divine revelation and faith and all, like what is like the apostolic, the history, and I kind of getting a bit lost in the third chapter of part because the topics of infallibility at least to the magisterium and all that stuff like that. Like the magisterium stuff is something that I'm not on as a subject, but I always try to sort of like keep first like proper distinctions of like when talking about like the papacy, the church, the magisterium, and like what kind of like pertains to thing. And usually when people get into online apologetics, immediately like after kind of like getting their sort of an idea of that, and this myself gotta I'm culpable is that they kind of get into are not at least, and they tend to kind of like make a bunch of arguments to the point that it sounds really to the point that they just essentially become like straw man arguments coming from themselves on the matter of mean by like infallible opposed to like church. They kind of like conflict. And I mean, like in the very recent stuff, and the part of the reason why I asked about the paper stuff is because of the recent sort of like comments of Pope. We don't have to get into that right now, but you see there's a lot of people that are kind of like already expecting, like already had an idea of what like the papacy should be. It doesn't matter if you're like a Catholic or, but like you already have people who are kind of idealized this to the point that this is causing like, how do you say, a lot of turmoil, especially almost like an affront to the faith. Which I'm not saying that that it should be taken lightly overall, but you do see that a lot of people had pretty much idealized how they kind of saw, like the whole. It's kind of very needed to kind of go into like the big sort of have like when these things come up, it doesn't very shocked at least in their sort of in their life if they like, because it's like, well, the Pope said that quote unquote system of Catholicism, what some people, some terms like that. That's kind of where I'm trying to at least approach it. That's why I don't talk much about the paper.
No, and that totally makes sense. I mean, it's one of those things where, saying the philosopher John M. Rist, I really would not recommend his book on the papacy at all. I would even say that it's kind of so bad that in the past, just due to how the Holy Office operated, it probably honestly would have been placed on the index. It's that bad. The index of forbidden books, for those who don't know. But one of the things he kind of talks about is, there's a difference between what is actually taught on the office of the Holy Father and what is kind of the like cultural perception that we have of this office. And, a lot of people sometimes talked about like, St. John Paul II, he was kind of a celebrity. He was on TV all the time. This is when, TV had kind of reached its like zenith for the first time in history. And, you could basically watch every papal audience. You could, there was footage of him speaking all the time. And he had a really good, really fantastic public persona. And Pope Benedict XVI, I would say, was kind of the same way. He, was kind of a little bit more quiet and reserved than the very like boisterous and outgoing St. John Paul II. But, he was still very like wise and reflective and what have you. And, Pope Francis's quality that I think makes him very lovable is, he's kind, he's merciful, he cares about every single human being. And I think if that was one positive of his papacy I would bring up is he's always done a really good job emphasizing, I think, God's mercy and forgiveness. But, because he's a Jesuit and because there's that kind of like for lack of a better term, kind of that Jesuitical approach of sometimes flying by the seat of your pants or what have you, that's become kind of popular with that generation. I think it sometimes makes him say things just kind of in an offhand way that, he doesn't mean with sort of a severeness, or, he's not maybe thinking about the full ramification, or how might one perceive what he's saying in a certain scenario. And it sometimes does lead to there being sometimes these events where people are like, well, does the Holy Father think this or think that? And of course, that's not the case. But, I think because he has that approach, it kind of creates some confusion. And, then people start to kind of attribute a level of infallibility to the Pope that it's like the First Vatican Council deliberately avoided, right? Like the First Vatican Council, what ultimately convinced sort of what was called the minority party at the First Vatican Council of the definition of papal infallibility was actually how like reserved it was. It wasn't this like every utterance of the Pope is infallible, every utterance is an ex cathedra dogmatic statement. And there were some people who now that wasn't their exact view, but they did have kind of a hyperinflated view of infallibility due to their reaction against sort of like the tendencies to attack the papal monarchy, because, if you attack the papal monarchy, you attack Christ, caused by liberalism in the 19th century. They tended to sort of like play up the prerogative or role of the papal office. And it led to some scandal amongst like St. John Henry Newman, especially, who thought, well, I, of course, accept papal infallibility, but it seems like these sort of extreme infallibilists, right, who most certainly could not be condemned because, their faith was just impeccable. I mean, they were incredible sons of the church, but, as sort of an overreaction against the liberalism of that time, wanted to make sort of like every statement of the Pope infallible, right? And, St. John Henry Newman was this great moderating voice of avoiding the extremes of either this sort of infallible minimalism that just reduces everything to like, oh, that's not ex cathedra, so I don't have to obey that. What you get sometimes with the liberals in the church who actually have a complete misunderstanding of what infallibility is, but they literally think that for something to be binding or infallible, it has to always be an ex cathedra definition, like the Assumption of Our Lady or the Immaculate Conception, not realizing that actually a habitual teaching of the church gains infallibility, right? Like the sinfulness of homosexuality or the sinfulness of contraception, right? And because of that, St. John Henry Newman cut through that minimalist interpretation, but he also cut through that maximalist interpretation, because he was like, look, we have cases like Honorius where it's like, Honorius, even if we were to grant that he wasn't a heretic when he wrote Sergius of Constantinople, the Sixth Ecumenical Council most certainly thought they could anathematize him, right? And so what do we do with that? Well, it's very simple. Even if he was to have erred in the exercise of his magisterium, the capacity in which he erred was in the exercise of his authentic magisterium, meaning the lowest level, where it's not a definitive teaching and it's not intending to bind the whole church. So, of course, he didn't make an ex cathedra statement. And so because there was that kind of conditioning of the definition of papal infallibility, it's a lot more moderate and reserved than people tend to think it is. But I think because of the celebrity perception of the Pope that has just kind of emerged in like the late 20th and early 21st century, we tend to think this idea of like the Pope must always say, every single thing is infallible, right? And that's just not true.
Yeah, if you were like, say, a medieval peasant, for the most part, you probably didn't even knew who the Pope was at the time until some decree would have just reached your area at something. Yeah,
and it's like, who his
I'll
name?
keep it real with y'all though. Like, I love Pope Francis, but he stresses me out right now. I'm gonna just be honest with you, and that's just me being like here. Just like, I get there's some guys like Catholic Orca, for example, he does a good job, but I'll put it like this way, Pinesap, I tip my hat off to you, because I don't think I could ever put in as much effort as you do in like a lot of these things, defending it, because some of this stuff is just hard even for me, where I'm like, I'm just gonna stick to my philosophy over here. I'll let someone way better than me like explain this.
It's I will say this. It is a cross that I have to carry. It's a very heavy cross. And I don't want to say that with any false humility. I'm a massive sinner, and really, in some small way, and sorry, this gets me a little choked up, so I'll try to keep it all together. But I went from someone who used to hate Pope Francis. I literally used to loathe Pope Francis. I thought he was a destroyer. I thought he was the worst pope we had ever had. He was like Honorius 2.0 times 10. And I used to get red in the face and have anxiety, just outbursts of anxious anger over his pontificate. And it got so bad that I mean, that's when I was attending the Society Chapel for an entire summer. And I just would like ritualistically almost like blaspheme him every single. And I remember it all kind of came to a head when my faith was challenged when Traditionis Custodes came out. And I was like, did I make the wrong decision becoming Catholic? Like, I thought this was supposed to be, the trad church, the traditional church, right? And I had this whole false perception that Pope Francis was like changing the faith. And I remember watching the debate between Eric Ybarra and Jay Dyer, and Catholicism, of course, being completely vindicated in that debate. I was
Eric
like,
Ybarra killed his ad debate.
I
Not trying to sound like rude here, but that was.
Yeah, all respect to Jayism, but yeah, Eric emphatically won that debate. And after watching that debate, I'm like, well, only Catholicism is true. So I'm like, what is my issue here? Like, what is the problem that I have? And I ultimately realized it was like my whole perception of church politics and how the church is and the divine protection that the church is afforded was wrong. And so, that's when I went back and I actually, for the first time in my life, read Vatican II in full. I read commentaries. I read the theologians who attended the council and, wrote all the documents and stuff like that. I was watching at the time a lot of Michael Lofton, even some much E. Michael Jones too. And I really had this kind of like humility that had to work its way into my heart that I hadn't experienced for the first time. And it was solely just by the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ to say, I don't know everything, but I need to. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, the church is not just a human institution. This isn't, Pope Francis isn't the CEO. He's not, just the CEO of Catholic Corp LLC. This is the Church of the Living God. This is the house of the living God. And, I know without a shadow of a doubt, this is the true faith. And what I was missing that entire time was exactly that, was faith. It was this faith that Jesus Christ had died on the cross for my sins, and he had created this church so that he could abide in that church forever. And this was the church that I had converted to. This was the church that I had promised to uphold and defend all of her sacred teaching to my dying breath. And when I realized that, and I realized that was the promise that I made, I almost in probably one of the most heartfelt confessions I've ever had in my entire life. And it probably will still be one of the most heartfelt I've ever had in my entire life. I went to my spiritual father, Father John, and I was like, I basically over the summer almost like went into schism. Like Father John, it was bad. I was attending the society and I said all these horrible things about Pope Francis. And from there, he said, kind of ironically, he's like, what I want you to do, he said, for the next 9 nights, because he wanted me to pray a novena, he said, I want you to pick a saint who was known for their obedience to the Roman pontiff. And I want you to recite, after you do that novena, I want you to recite the Tridentine, the Creed from the Council of Trent. And I want you to do that every single night for 9 nights. And I said, okay, I will, Father. And he absolved me of my. And so every single night I knelt in prayer, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I really opened my heart to God and the grace of the God. Not that I hadn't done that before, but I really just had this like almost helplessness that washed over me of like, I need to be completely yours, Lord. And as I prayed this novena to St. Padre Pio, I realized, what gave St. Padre Pio the strength to always defend the Roman pontiff, to castigate people who spoke bad about him or what have you, was it wasn't just some blind obedience. It wasn't just some, this has got to work out because it's just got to work out. It was faith. And from that moment on, when I finished the novena, I promised God I looked up to heaven and I said in one breath, I promise you, Lord, for the rest of my day, I will defend the successor of St. Peter till I die. And that's a promise that I take with the utmost severity and the utmost seriousness. And I know I will probably have friends leave me over that. I bet there will be people who turn their back on me. I have no doubt that there will be people who will not understand it or not get it. And I don't want to wish any hatred upon them or be resentful for that. But it is something that I must do because I'm a Roman Catholic. And that is the faith that I live with, and that is the faith with as great of a sinner as I am.
Amen to that. Forgive me for saying this too, and I wish I would have the faith you have right now. But for me, it was definitely something I'm going to be honest, struggle with till today, where when I came back into the faith, it was near when I was in the military and I had a friend bring me back. And funny enough, he brought me through to TLM first. I didn't even know what, other liturgies were or anything like that. And that was in North Carolina. Then when I came back to my hometown, Georgia, once I got out, I'm not going to lie to you, it was a pretty hard gut punch seeing the difference. And it wasn't even necessarily the mass or anything like that. It was just more the people, where I feel like people just didn't care. And it took time, and it was something I struggled with a lot. And for a good while, I was like dabbling in pretty heavy with the SSPX. And after a while, similar to you, I just straight up like went to a priest and confession. I told him like, hey, I'm really struggling with this right now. Like, never once have I ever considered myself a sedevacantist. I think that's a stupid position. I've always held true that if Catholicism is false, then Christianity as a whole is false. Like, there is only the church. You can't retreat and hide to Eastern Orthodoxy. You can't go and schism away to like Protestantism. There's only the Catholic Church. And it's frustrating to me because I told my priest straight up, like, hey, I've never seen myself as like a sedevacantist, but like it's weighing down on me, like seeing a lot of things that's going on. But what I've been doing now for past few months has been like strictly like saying like, hey, I'm going to attend, this Novus Ordo parish, go here, just try to be more part of a community and learn to love like all the masses. Because at the end of the day, they're all part of the Catholic Church,
Absolutely.
And the same way, like I'd go to a Byzantine one and love them, even though I'm not a Byzantine Catholic, I can respect them type thing. But it's definitely a battle for me, and I'd ask you and anyone listening of like your prayers for that, because it's something I struggle with a lot.
Absolutely, brother. I will absolutely pray for you. And, if I might just show the show we're currently recording aside and stuff like that, like if I'm to just put that aside for a moment, the biggest thing I would tell you is, one of the things that struck me the most when I read the saints, I feel like there's always some wisdom that pours through that for some reason, even though they lived in their own times, completely separate from ours, they didn't have the same technology, they didn't have the same necessarily struggles always that we do. They actually did. And, one fragment, one letter that I think would really help you to meditate upon is that of Saint Basil the Great. And I'm trying to place the letter in my head, the exact number, but there was essentially a letter that Saint Basil wrote where he kind of talked about like the state of the church in the time that he lived. And not only can it pair very much with our own times and our own struggles, but in a very odd way, it actually sometimes seems kind of worse at some parts, and in his struggle with the Arians, he remarked how, basically a lot of the churches had fallen into heresy. There were many priests, there were many bishops who he did not feel were at all worthy of being in those positions. The old people who would go to mass or what have you, go to the divine liturgy, worried about the future, and the young people, didn't seem to really care and seemed to be carried off away into other things. And to keep this in mind, like this is towards the end of his life when he's struggling with these thoughts. But the thing that shines through in that letter is, as much as he struggled in his faith, as much as he had this very human, the saint of God. I'm positive he's also a doctor of the church, if memory serves me right. But this doctor of the church, the saint of God, who struggled so much in his faith towards the end of his life, it's amazing because he didn't get to see the renewal that happened after, right? Nobody's an Arian anymore. Nobody is an Arian. There's no Arian church. There's no Arian. They've gone the way of the dodo. And through his sacrifice and his struggle, these churches not only were restored, but they came back tenfold. These are churches we go to today and we visit as pilgrimage sites, and we look at and we say, these are the holy temples of God in which our fathers prayed, and in which, our hearts are rended to almost desire to live in that time more than our own. But to think that in his own life, he never saw the fruit of his struggle for the true faith, that he thought that even the church was capitulating, going over the edge, only for it to have one of the most beautiful renewals of all time, is truly a testament to the indestructibility of the Catholic faith. And I would really encourage, I can even find it for you. I would really
That'd be
encourage.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured I keep thinking, it's sort of related, but like I remember when I was reading Bishop Barron's book on Catholicism, he had a section dedicated to saints in the Catholic Church, and the people that stood up for me were Thomas Merton, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, Saint Teresa of Avila, and Saint John of the Cross. And Saint John of the Cross specifically is like, he was persecuted by his own brethren. He was persecuted in a sense by his own church, at least. And yet, you can see, aspect of his faith, which I only just read a couple of his poems, not much on the commentary, but still, it's like, we do saints that have gotten or have been in a suffering, and sort of like in a position where we're able to see that with our own eyes, everything will crumble of us people of little faith.
It's really the question too for me. I personally, I'm sure Pinesap, if you want to like also comment on it well, but I feel like it's a very hard type having grace and human having righteous anger for something like that frustrates you. A lot of that time, I was almost like in denial of myself, like just being so feeling like people didn't care, and like there are accounts like, for example, Michael Lofton. And hearing him say the things he say about people who go to TLM, it genuinely made me infuriated. Where I'm like, you're a guy who goes to a Byzantine Catholic. You don't even have like a dog in it. Like you're over here celebrating. Francis does actually. Pope Francis removes the TLM. Like that hurt for me because it feels like you're attacking a brother in Christ. But after a while, it just realized like a lot of it wasn't just righteous anger, but it was like pride. It was a personal pride. It was like. And I'm sure everyone deep down, like I'll say it, I'm sure people know it, but like, yeah, there are a handful of people TLM. I myself was one of them for a long time who go there because I think I'm better than our people. Like, okay, I'm here doing this while they're doing that. I'm taking the faith serious. They're like over here, on autopilot. But yeah, I appreciate it. Sorry if I'm going a bit off tangent for this podcast, but it's just something that's been weighing on my heart.
No, of course. Well, and the biggest thing that we always have, no matter who we are, is that Jesus Christ, at the end of the day, it's in hands, it doesn't mean we don't do it. It doesn't mean that we don't get angry. It doesn't mean that we're indifferent. To be indifferent is completely wrong. And to look in indifference is not embracing the wood of our cross. But, when our Lord was crucified on Calvary, it was not a moment of celebration. Every apostle thought that he had died, that our Lord had died, and that the promise of his resurrection, him being the Messiah had essentially been broken. And that wood of the cross, to be on Calvary, you feel the cold and the wind of life lash at you. You see our Savior crucified and seemingly not triumphing. And who are his enemies? It's indifference. It's the Susans from the parish council who seem to care more about worldly liberal politics than they do the faith. It's Father Boomer Bob, who wants to give nice sounding homilies on God's mercy and grace, but not truly care about upholding teachings of our Lord. It's every time you hear a bishop's, it's all of that. That's the wood. That's what lashes at us. It's easy to say, God, where are you in all of this? Where are you in the midst of all this chaos and this destruction? And to lose hope and to lose faith. But the same God who died on the cross when we had lost all is the same who resurrected 3 days later and was glorified. And we could point at his hands and we could touch his hands and realize that he was living. He had not died. He had not perished, but rather he had not only overcome his enemies, but he had overcome the entire world. And in that way, to be on Calvary with Jesus means to reform ourselves, to understand that even when we see other people sin massively and fail in their duty as a Catholic, it is an opportunity for us to be even more Catholic, so that not only may those people not be destroyed, may those people not be torn apart or thrown into the fires of hell, but may they be edified by our example. Maybe, Father Boomer Bob can see how much kids care about going to, young men care about going to confession. And maybe that old heart that grew up in the 60s, grew up in the crazy 60s, may be rended to remember his Catholic faith of his childhood. And then he may be a great Orthodox Catholic. Maybe Susan from the parish council didn't understand the treasures that she grew up with that we cling to so dearly now. And maybe she might be moved to embrace a whole different side of her faith that she never really knew about. We can be a catalyst not only of change in our own lives through the grace of our Lord, but in the lives of even those who we feel animosity towards. We're tempted to hate. We're tempted to gnash our teeth at. Understanding that even if, one person, one voice is not going to topple God's truth. And so it's both a tenuous balance in the spiritual life about reforming ourselves so that we may be the catalyst of change but it's also a manner of putting it ultimately in God's hands and realizing that he has the truth. It's not our anxieties. It's not our struggles, but rather it's him who will always overcome the world.
That means a lot.
Of course, brother. I'm glad anything good you heard did not come from Jesus Christ.
No, that's how I know I'm doing good. Sometimes you even forget you're doing it. It just feels like a natural.
That's what I'm talking.
What else was I thinking? You were recently, what would you say though on, are you trying to make your specialty though of the Catholic Church? Like, and when I say specialty, like, is there anything in particular you're trying to read in defending the church with? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, before I die, I hope, but only, I haven't opened my heart enough to God to just allow him to do what he wants to do in my life. Maybe this has been too much of my own desire, but I've wanted to write on the indestructibility, the indefectibility of the church before I die. But I don't want it to just a theological treatment. I don't want it to just be a dry manual or what have you. Not that manuals are dry, but I don't want it to just simply be a reciting of facts that we know about our faith, but I want it to be a living, breathing testament to the fact that, Jesus Christ always is present in this world, even amidst the storms and chaos of life, and that his church is a visible sign of his presence on. And the reason I want to write this is because it has mattered, that attribute of church has mattered so much in my own life when, I felt like things were not going well, when my whole world was falling apart, to know that, only the church would always remain as a constant in my life. And the reason I love that the train is because I know that Christ remains. And if I can share that with other people in the way that that's meant to me, before I die, I think I can leave this life knowing that hopefully I gave a little bit more witness to him. And that's ultimately what I want to do.
That'd be beautiful. It would be amazing.
Yeah, there needs to be a lot more prayer and a lot more meditation that goes into that for sure. It can't be just some like dry approach, some quote mine or anything like that. It definitely needs to be a work of love for Jesus Christ. But I just hope I can do it. And I would maybe ask if you guys could definitely pray for me to have the strength to do it, not falling into sloth or putting it on the back burner. I would greatly appreciate that.
No, definitely. And recently, actually, someone in our circle, is it Duwong, is how you say his name?
Duwong, yeah,
Duwong.
buddy. Oh my goodness,
yeah.
Really book.
I saw him do that, and I'm like, oh, nice. I need to read that now because, like, his videos. Oh my gosh! Like, I just got to compliment this dude for a minute. I've never even met him, spoken yet, but his videos is like watching a surgeon go to work. Like at the level of perfection he's at. Building his case up, defending things. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, he's actually doing like a really solid job. He's like, oh, here are rebuttals to it by watch me destroy. Dang, okay, I see you over there. But yeah, I love that guy to death.
I think I have known in proclaiming. I think he's emphatically settled the. Like I've never seen such
that video of him and Christian West. Oh, I was like listening. I'm like
the debate with Ubi. Like I just remember reading the comment section after, and everyone was, dude, you did not do good in this debate. Wake up and drink some coffee, man. You were not on your A game. And then when he debated David Earnhardt, it wasn't really the same thing, but it was kind of the same thing. Like, yeah, Christian got me considering Catholicism now after this Filioque debate. I'm like, that's just insane, dude. That's beautiful. Blessed be God.
Yeah. I do have a second question. I do have to leave early. Sorry about that, Sola.
We're about to wrap up soon. Probably go another 30 minutes. Yeah, close up. What's up?
Yeah, like related to the first question that I have, like in regards to, well, the first had to do with the papacy. I think the second, it's more like ecclesiology in general, at least as far as that can sort of like maybe sort of I don't know because I know that on its own is a much extensive like topic, but I guess it's like if I were to just go through my fundamental theology book, apostolic tradition, and apostolic succession. Like how would I guess ecclesiology from that point. You were kind of mentioning things that are, I think it was St. John Henry Newman, that kind of speaks about how do we sort of understand something infallible, not just simply it has to be and all that. I guess something to kind of what was the sort of thing John Henry Newman.
Most of my readings of St. John Henry Newman have actually been from a beautiful quote book put together by Dave Armstrong. Now, when people hear quote book, that's kind of regarded as a dirty word because they're like, "Oh, you're just reading little snippets. That doesn't matter a whole lot."
Right.
Rather, it's entire like large passages from St. John Henry Newman's work because he was such a prolific writer that it's kind of it can be kind of daunting if you're new to his work to really like get into it. Right? You're like, oh man, like I've got Apologia, Pro Vita Sua. I've got the lectures he gave to former Anglicans coming into the church. I've got a bunch of his apologetical work, a bunch of his devotional work, and what have you. Where do I start? And that Dave Armstrong quotable St. John Henry Newman, I believe is what it's called, or the quotable Newman, is probably one of the best starts, I would say, for St. John Henry Newman's work specifically. And that includes some of his writings on papal infallibility, indefectibility. He's got a beautiful treatment of Pope Honorius in there. Various like meditations on Our Lady, on like the modern world and stuff like that. Just kind of a little bit of everything. But, in terms of a work on ecclesiology, I think the best work that you could ever honestly read,
it has to be something that I can I can get in like in a very sort of like a almost not that has to be too dumbed down, but like you get what I mean.
So there's basically a theological textbook from Tan Books called Introduction to Ecclesiology, and that's a very beautiful one. That's a great one. I've heard nothing but fantastic things about it. But if you want a more spiritual, a work that I think is going to matter a lot more to your soul and understanding the mystical body of Christ. Ironically, the name of the book is The Mystical Body of Christ, and it is actually written by none other than Venerable Fulton Sheen. That book, if I had to give one person an ecclesiological work that they could read before they die, and I could only choose one, it would probably be that book. I think that book truly goes into the depth and the beauty of our Catholic faith. I think it just maps out like what does it mean to be a part of the church, Christ's mystical body, and he does so in such a beautiful yet accessible style that is also spiritual too. It's not just a dry treat ecclesiology, but in a deeply spiritual, mystical manner that I think you're going to gain a lot of fruit if you read that book.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would look. I usually do my Amazon as like politics, Aristotle, Plato, like that, down in the
Absolutely.
stuff. But like, yeah, I'll try to look into that. I think that I think that will be a better recommendation. That usually like I do the sort of like dry read. Well, I don't want to say that all these books that kind of like of these high, but I do kind of like that in a while since kind of invest orthodoxy, which is not like a mere apologetic, but he does actually get into sort of like almost experience and this sort of like a rekindling of like a childlike faith. That was actually one of the alongside with his book on St. Thomas that kind of really got system, or at least looking into. And it's like it's been awesome to kind of like, what's the term for it? It gets into like, or at least it has a more direct approach in connecting it. What I wanted to say there, sorry about that, but yeah, no, I do have to leave morning. Sorry about I just miscalculated.
No, that's totally fine. I'll see you.
Yeah, thanks for helping out. Okay, we'll be wrapping up soon. More questions I'll throw your way. Let me think what I was going to ask. Off of the top of your head, who do you think in our circle, Catholic content creator, are doing pretty good, like actually growing really fast? Like, is there any like new faces we should be looking out for?
I would definitely say Christian Wagner. I think Christian Wagner is taking the Catholic internet by storm. And I'm glad to see taking it by storm, because I think he's adding a much needed change to the whole environment of Catholic apologetics. I would say Duong is another voice, and I really, really appreciate and love him very, very much, just like I love Christian. And my friend Unionist Initiative, he runs a channel called Distinguio, which has Christians work on there. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to do some collaborations with him as well to put some work on there, but he is probably the best editor. He edits videos like not Galileo, sorry, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. He makes the most beautiful and edifying videos that I've ever seen. And if you've ever seen, to kind of draw a comparison, even though he's a schismatic and I desperately want him to become Catholic, Harmony, the Eastern Orthodox YouTuber, he makes some very beautiful videos in that style. I would say that Unionist makes videos so beautiful that it even rivals his.
Okay, nice. And I definitely say our shout out to be Project Mystic. They're doing a good job in the Philippines. Really great guys. I've watched a couple of their debates. They're growing pretty fast, but
Beautiful.
something I wanted to actually ask, but it's just me. It feels like the debate ending. And I'm not saying ending as in like it's gone forever, but I feel like a lot of people are waking up to the fact of like the Catholic and all of her beauty and majesty. But they're struggling on the question of what should I choose between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. And I've been noticing, especially a lot of really big heavy hitter accounts like Eric Yabar and a couple other people, Jimmy Akin comes to mind too, are throwing their hats in the ring, and you yourself included actually, and like going head to head with the. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. Do you think in the upcoming years that Protestantism is going to go away more, and it's just going to be more of like Roman Catholics versus Eastern Orthodox?
If I'm being completely blunt with you, I don't think that Eastern Orthodoxy will also have very longevity either. I think we're already seeing kind of its death knell in apologetical online circles. And the reason I say that is because what they had in strength at first in terms of the apologetical arena is there really were not a lot of Catholics engaging with their content. So it was kind of like it was kind of like a silent attack on the faith, right? Because not a lot of most Catholics were kind of dismissive of the Eastern Orthodox. They're like, okay, well, they're a bunch of like fractured churches. Here's a quote mine of some saints talking about the filioque and the papacy. Some of those quotes just basically being like Pope good and that sort of thing. And because they were kind of overly dismissive, it created this vacuum where they were just beating the living heck out of Protestantism to the point where it's like, I call to mind that one Simpsons episode where like Homer starts beating up the clown and he's like, stop, he's already dead. I mean, it's like I'm gonna be blunt. How many times does James White need to get embarrassed before we're just like, okay, like this guy's been debunked. Can we just move on? You know what I mean?
Up one more time. I had a debate with a Catholic in 1983. I know what I'm talking about here. I'm like, dude, like
he had a debate. He had a debate with Jerry Maddox, and Jerry Maddox is a sedevacantist. He's not even Catholic, and it's like, yeah, yeah, he's like citing, I had a debate with Jerry Maddox back in, back in the 90s. Well, congratulations, buddy. It's like 30 years later, right? Time to stop living off your laurels at that point. And
I love how Voice of Reason, his second debate ever, just curb stomped him right to the bit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is because
I know.
That was Voice of Reason, that was amazing.
Yeah, dude, someone had to get ambulance after that one. It was pretty bad. And I will confess, I haven't really watched the debate much, but I remember just in the few clips I even managed to see just circulated on Twitter or whatever. It was just so embarrassing. And I mean, it's like Protestantism is inconsistent. There have been people, I would say the best Protestant apologist, if I had to truly credit it, would be the other Paul. I think he is probably the best Protestant apologist I've ever seen. He does a really, really, really good job. He's an incredibly intelligent guy. I've debated him. He is not an easy person to debate by any means. But really, besides him, who, he gets very deep into this question, it's like Gavin Ortlund has been beat to heck a
Mike
number of
Ringer's been beat to heck. One.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all these guys who they've been so disproven, debunked, just like to shreds in terms of apologetics, to the point where, you know, it really does come down to kind of the final. And I mean, you know, you got some other false religions, like I know Islam is there in the background, but I mean, I've never seen a Christian lose a debate against them, to be honest. Like they just, it's almost like taking taking candy, you know. I mean, the Muslims do always so bad, it's embarrassing. Atheists, same thing, it's like they do horrible. And then finally, you know, we get on the question of like Eastern Orthodoxy. And you know, don't get me wrong, like Ubi's a very smart guy. Like you know, as much as I don't like him, like he's a smart guy. Craig Trulli is a smart guy. You know, most certainly Jay Dyer is a very smart guy. You know, even I've had some beef with recently, you know, Luigi is even a smart guy too. But the thing about them is ultimately what they'll try to do. This isn't so much Ubi's approach, and this isn't so much Craig's approach. They're a little bit more, they just stick to kind of like, you know, a bar of history or whatever, which I you know, I do respect that they don't go for the kind of like, oh, well, look at, you know, clown mass, become Orthodox, right? Which, you know, that can instantly be
Your
disproven.
diamond moment.
Yeah, well, and it's like they have liturgical abuse and liturgical liberalism happen too. I mean, there's entire Orthodox parishes that don't recite any anathemas during the Sunday of Orthodoxy because it's like a sin against ecumenism. Whereas like all Catholic parishes recite, you know, minus the anathemas that were, you know, after the schism, right? But those anathemas were recited before the schism. You know, they don't recite the anathemas that all the anathemas that the Eastern Orthodox would recite. But, you know, Eastern Catholics, their parish will recite all the anathemas on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, right? Of the triumph of Orthodoxy over the iconoclast. And, you know, it's like you start to kind of pick that apart. And, you know, they'll also bring up some very interesting arguments like, well, you know, you depict the Father in art and stuff like that. And, you know, even Luigi, I've heard him say that. And then he'll post Dr. Edward Shinsky's book on the timeline. It's like on the cover of that book is literally an icon of God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. Now, you know, he probably would try to be like, well, it's not canonical, so it doesn't count. But it's like, it doesn't matter, dude. It's just a bad apologetic at this point. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, you know,
I may ask you really quick before I keep going down. Sorry to cut you off, but you and Luigi, you guys good now? Because I remember seeing a while ago. I want to again really quick apologize for these scum the way what they did, but I remember in a set of a contest recently to see, you know, family member. That was one of the scummiest things I've ever saw in my life, and I'm glad like at that time Luigi kind of like backed off of you and he's like, yeah, man, I get we have our differences, but we got that in common that we're not subhuman basically to do that.
Yeah, no, I even with what I'm about to say, I do still respect him for that. That was very stand up of him. I meant every single word about that. That did speak a lot to his character in that moment that he was willing to do that. I am now not good with, and the reason why is because we were good leading up to the debate. We were good after, but you know, he has kind of continuously decided to blaspheme Catholicism, and he has decided to kind of continually, I mean, just kind of act like a jerk, to be honest, to the point where it's very disingenuous. And anytime, you know, he'll bring up some, oh, well, your Pope said this. Oh, well, you know, clown mass and average Novus Ordo or what have you. And he instantly gets, I mean, I'm not trying to brag, but I like ratio this kid every single reply. And he'll just
I've done that a hand with him too. It's rough.
Yeah, it's rough. Like he's not even doing that well. And I think it's because even other Eastern Orthodox realize it's like he's like making very low ball arguments, right? Because anytime someone does start to engage with him in like straight up theology, I mean, you saw what happened with Christian Wagner. Christian started to engage in actual theology with him, and he's like, well, you're fat, LMAO, and then, you know, retreated back. And it's like, that speaks a lot to, I think, his inability to defend an indefensible position, right? And, you know, I kind of just lost it on him the other day. I mean, he was like saying all kinds of just nasty things about our faith. And, you know, he's doing this like unfair kind of like, you know, well, look at this scandal thing. Look at this, you know, look at what your Pope said and that sort of thing. And I just got to the point where I'm like, dude, you're just a vulture, to be honest.
Yeah.
You're a vulture and you're a liar. And, I wish the best for him. Every word of apology where I remember I'd made some posts about him. Like I had called him a simp when there was that whole like controversy over the OnlyFans girl who I think had become like Eastern Orthodox or whatever. I meant every word of that apology. I still stick by that apology. I'm not rescinding that just because I, have a problem with the way that he decides to blaspheme our Lord Jesus Christ. But I'm not going to let anyone insult my faith, and whatever good terms we were on, if he wants to apologize and make it right and stop using this kind of like horrible, uncharitable approach to how he talks about our faith, I will be the person to forgive him. But as long as he just acts arrogant and he acts full of himself, I'm going to keep swinging. And that's kind of my honest message that I would have for him or for any other Eastern Orthodox figure.
No, and I completely respect that. I get it, because even for us, like when I go after I'm going to word this carefully. I'm not I'm not anti-existence. I'm more anti-Catholic, as in I don't like people attacking the Holy Church. And if you're going to do that, I'm going to defend the church and throw back. As in, don't expect like, what's the saying? If you can't handle the kitchen type thing. Like, Don't be surprised if I say something back to you. Like, I'd really check yourself. Like some guy earlier, I made a joke on Mormonism, and this independent fundamental Baptist, I kid you not, denomination is created in like 2013. The group he's affiliated with. I was like, dude, you're trying to make a jab at Catholicism, saying like, oh, Mormons have more wisdom than the Catholics. I'm like, dude, Mormons have existed way longer than you. I'd sit this one out if I were you, buddy. Like, yeah, they're heretics and they're wrong, but if you want to play the, continue like the secession game, then I don't think you're going to win that one.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where, ultimately, I mean, I will go even further and say I am anti-Protestant. I am anti-Eastern Orthodox. I mean, anti whatever is not Catholicism. But there's a difference between when we have apologetical approaches. For instance, let me give an example. If I was debating James White, I would not say, well, look at the, Reformed Church of America. Look how liberal they are. And I'm not sure about these claims about the Reformed Church of America. I'm just giving a hypothetical, but let's say they were marrying two homos, right? They were marrying two dudes, right? Or they were ordaining women, or they were, doing that kind of nasty stuff. If I was debating him, I wouldn't bring that up because that's kind of irrelevant to the. It's sort of a red herring that's trying to distract from the conversation, which is truth. Because here's the thing, and I don't care who you are, you're always going to have someone in your ecclesial community, meaning, the Protestant quote unquote churches, or, your church that is, they don't live up to the standards that you set out or that you have. They're not someone who is a good representation of what you really believe. And if I was going to use that person as an example of like, here's why I'm not Protestant, here's why I'm not Eastern, I would be a fool and a liar, and I would be a dishonest apologist. Like, I was more than willing when I was converting from Anglican to reconsider converting from Anglicanism if I found it to be true. Look, if it was the case that Anglicanism was the true faith and I needed to just stay in the Anglican churches and essentially do the Reconquista that Redeemed Zoomer is doing, I would be doing that right now. And what I found is merely that it's false. It's just not true, right? If I found out that Mormonism was actually the religion founded by our Lord, I would be, knocking on door to door with the name tag and the white shirt, right? But I know through reason and through the proofs given by our Lord Jesus Christ that Catholicism, and that is, it's not
Exactly.
How did X bishop act, or a person said here. Look what people have said throughout his church. There's always been heretics. There's always been, people selling church offices, corruption, what have you. And none of that should be used in any of our debates as an example of invalidating claims of truth. We should solely be focusing on the truth.
No, exactly. And I'm not trying to straw man here, but I have a handful of acquaintances with Orthodox. A lot of them, when I ask them, like, why are you Eastern Orthodox? It's always along the lines of like, oh, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's based, it's trad, all these things like that. And it's just like, okay, I'm Roman Catholic because it's true. I'm not doing this because it makes me feel good. I'm not doing this because I get like fuzzies at big church building. I do this because the Roman Catholic faith is the one true faith founded by Jesus Christ. Simple as that. There's nothing else to add on there. That's the reason why.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and it's St. John of the Cross talk out, or rather, St. John of the Cross does have this with like spiritual gluttony or like desiring sort of these like externalities that are not really the truth. But, St. Augustine, he famously said, a man can find everything outside the Catholic Church except salvation, right? So you can, of course, I don't deny, I have a conservative Anglican church right close to me. They have a beautiful Sunday liturgy. Most beautiful I've ever seen. Beautiful, beautiful Sunday liturgy. And a lot of their parishioners are super based and awesome people and stuff like that. And I agree with them pretty much on every political standpoint they hold. But the reason I don't go to that church is because it's not true. It's not the true Church of Jesus Christ. And I can find a beautiful liturgy. I can find, priests with a lot of wisdom and, cool writings or what have you, or esoteric knowledge outside of the Catholic Church, but I can't find salvation. And that's why I'm Catholic.
Definitely. Well, honestly, Pinesap, it's been amazing to have you on. We're going to go through some Q&A and wrap it up. You good with that, bud? Or is there anything else you'd like to throw in?
No, that's it. Go right ahead.
All right, sounds good. And there's a mix of people who send these in who want to be anonymous, their names read. It's just usually something I've done. But Disciple Fitness, he'd like to ask you, quote, assuming someone has already finished reading the Bible and the Catechism of the Catholic Church, what general study plan would you give them if they want to learn the faith and church history on a deeper level?
That is a very big question, so I won't be able to approximate like every single book or every single thing you should look into. But the biggest thing that I would say is that theological manuals are very, very, very helpful in this regard, right? The manuals are what were used in seminaries, especially around, the late 1800s to the early 1900s. They were very, very popular. It was called the manualist movement. And actually, Christian Wagner's written a very good defense of manualism, because a lot of people like to throw it under the bus and be like, oh, it was dry or boring. And it's like, that couldn't be further from the truth. But, what I would say is that manualism is super helpful because you tap into these different manuals. Like, to give an example, like Father Silvestri, Church of Christ, right? And that's a manual on ecclesiology. And what it does is it kind of systematically has you go through every aspect of church ecclesiology, understanding like the depth and the richness of our faith. And that, after that, there's many great sort of like historical series. Like, I know Henri, I think his name is Henri de Ropes, had a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful volumes on church history. Monsignor Philip Hughes has great church history books. One of my favorite, he actually writes one of my favorites on all the ecumenical councils, except when he finished the book, it was 1956 or 58. So Vatican II had not happened yet. But he has a great book on all the councils leading up to Vatican II and sort of the surrounding controversy and things that happened during then. You need like an easy introduction to church history, but still very packed with a lot of fact. I would say James Hitchcock's magnum opus, History of the Catholic Church from Ignatius Press, is like a seminal work. So my difficulty in answering this question is not that there aren't a lot of books that you can read, but it's kind of such a large topic that I think you should go to whatever apologist or YouTuber is kind of renowned for certain topics and see what they recommend. I know like William Albrecht is great on like Marian theology, right? And Mariology. I know that, Christian is great at like the filioque and Thomism and a lot of like metaphysical things. I know, Duong, filioque, and the essences energies distinction. I know that, guys like Trent Horn are good at like particular addresses about like abortion or what have you. And so they'll probably have books that they'll recommend or books that they'll put forth. And even Catholic Answers actually has a book list for apologists that I recommend checking.
Definitely. Thank you. And here's a bit of a joking question from Sushi Fries. He wants to know, are you wearing cargo shorts? I don't know what that means.
So, well, at the Detroit rally that happened instead of AFPAC, I was not well dressed at all because I thought that AFPAC had been canceled. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like chill in like my t-shirt and shorts. Like I'm not gonna get all like dressed up over nothing. And because of that, I was in cargo shorts and a t-shirt when
No.
they like told me to walk up on the stoop that was just outside Turning Point USA. And I prayed the rosary and gave a speech. And so from that moment on, people have been joking about me wearing cargo shorts and stuff like that. I also, not to be sus or anything like that. I also, let's just say I'm packing a little extra in the trunk too. So that was very noticeable from the photos. So a lot of people.
All right, I didn't know that. Wait, you were on stage next to Nick Fuentes, right? I think I saw that like clip. That was pretty awesome.
I was not on.
Dude, you looked like you were on fire that day. I was watching. That's a spirit of God right there.
Yeah, no, I was not on stage next to Nick. He was actually on the like rafters that was like over that little stoop. But before Nick came, we were all giving a bunch of speeches, and Culture War Criminal gave like a great speech. Grayson gave a great speech. TR gave a great speech. Wurzelroot gave a great speech. And then Culture War Criminal was kind of holding it down. I also gave it. And CWC was holding it down, but his voice was starting to give out because he had spoke for so long that I was like, why don't we pray the rosary till Nick gets? And then literally after we finished the rosary, Nick pulls up and gives one of the best speeches I've ever heard in my entire life.
I know this is going to sound like a silly thing, but you spoke with him live, right?
Not really. I mean, I've shook his hand, and I gave, I'm trying to remember, I gave Jake Shields the third class relic of Brini that I was meaning to give to Nick. I really hope he did not throw it out or forget about it and did Nick, but, I've only shaken Nick's hand, but I've talked with him in group chats, and I would be honored, honestly, to sit down and talk with Nick, though. He literally is my hero. I'm not even joking about that. I look up to him.
Okay, sounds good. And we got a question from Lefebvre Groiper. He says, hey, Nick, what are your thoughts on Archbishop?
Oh, what are my thoughts?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. And Lefebvre Groiper is a guy. I like him a lot. I think Lefebvre had a good heart. I think he did intend a lot of good and he did want to do a lot of good, but I think he was very mistaken when he started turning on the Second Vatican Council and on the Holy Father. I mean, Pope St. Paul VI writes a very heartbreaking letter to him about, he was basically going up and down like Switzerland and France. And, these sermons would be published in like magazines like Le Figaro and stuff like that, where he basically kind of was like flirting and sometimes kind of espousing sedevacantism. And that was in his like early kind of 70s days. And he was very, very fiery then. Then he kind of toned down during St. John Paul II's papacy. And then towards the end, I mean, it's very heartbreaking, but the last interview he ever gave in 1990, he basically says, he's like, the church needs to reconcile with me, right? That's essentially what he puts it in a more delicate manner, but he essentially says, he's like, the church needs to reconcile with us. And what's heartbreaking is here you had someone who had done so much good for the church. When he was Archbishop of Dakar, he was, incredible, did a lot of great work in Africa and stuff like that, had some great homilies, some great spiritual fruit that came about with that. But he just ended his life in a very tragic way. And I see him as ultimately sort of a tragic figure, but I don't think that people should look up to him because ultimately he didn't ultimately the church. You know what I mean? And I think that's my central problem with, people kind of praising him or what have you.
It's because I feel like Michael Lofton does that. I don't know. Like I said, I do have a pass of the still sympathetic to a lot of them as I've met them in person. A lot of them seem to be great people, but I can't deny, what he did was wrong. I'm not going to like sin. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What he did, it is kind of brain dead and retarded to compare him to Martin Luther. It's just not even remotely the same. I mean, Luther denied like all of Shane, right? And Archbishop Lefebvre, rather, it's like he denied an ecumenical council and sort of in an ostensible way denied the indefectibility.
That's a heresy too, isn't it?
It is a heresy, yeah. He didn't intentionally deny it, but he did unintentionally deny it when he perceived that, two popes and an entire ecumenical council could err as monumental as he said, right? I would compare, and many other people wiser than myself have done this, I would compare him more to Ignaz von Dollinger. And Dollinger, he was a he was probably one of the best church historians who ever lived in the 19th century. But he put aside prayer. He stopped praying the daily office every day, which is your requirement of priests, right? He got a dispensation to stop praying the daily office. And when Vatican I came, he just completely lost his faith and turned on the council. And he was like publishing books under the pseudonym called Janus, where he said that they were departing from tradition and that he was really upholding church tradition and fighting for the church of old. And ultimately, he just died out of communion with the church and kind of was this tragic figure. He was this figure who had done so much good and so great stuff for the church, and then just sadly died a kind of sad ending.
Definitely. Okay, let's see what we got. This is from Christian Futurist Groiber. He says, "What are your thoughts?"
Oh, the Nouvelle
versus Neoclassicism.
So, a lot of actually has commented a lot. Like the Nouvelle Théologie is kind of an accurate term, and it's kind of not. It broadly represented a movement of people kind of not being in like the traditional neo-Thomist school. That school was very defined by like, kind of the manual, like theological manual approach to theology and stuff like that, and kind of like a strict observance Thomism. And quite frankly, I love the neo school. It is my favorite. I do love it immensely. But a lot of people who get wrapped up in the Nouvelle Théologie, or rather are implicated as being a part of it, it's not really that accurate. There are some people completely accurate for. I would say Karl Rahner. I would say Dominique Chenu. I would say Edward Schillebeeckx. Who all those guys were modernists and probably some of the worst men to have ever lived in church history, if I'm being completely blunt. Mm-hmm. But there were other men who are actually on their way, who I would not at all say were a part of that school or fairly put in that school. And that's men like, Henri de Lubac. That's men like Hans von Balthasar. That's meant like even Pope Benedict XVI got put in that school, and it's just not really accurate. It's kind of an occasion of just this kind of newer approach to theology that emerged. And their school, there would be more accurately called the ressourcement or resourcing movement, where they kind of like went back to kind of reassessing a lot of the works of the early church fathers, and kind of taking in some ways a more like, I guess you could say, a primitive theological approach, like kind of trying to write sort of like the early fathers. And, when they would write treatments on theology, they were not really systematic. They were kind of more like written like a poem, but more like a manual, a book of love, right? That's why you have like Henri de Lubac write books like Splendor of the Church. And it's not meant to be like a systematic treatment of ecclesiology or what have you, but it's just meant to, kind of address his love for the church. And there's certain strengths with that approach, and there's also certain weaknesses. The one thing about manualism is it does keep more strict in your approach to the orthodoxy of the faith. Whereas, the ressourcement approach can kind of get at times a little too flowery. But on the other end of it, sometimes manualism taken to just sort of a strict observance can be a little dry. And, those books with the ressourcement movement can add kind of like again, like a sense of wonder to our faith that we can have a tendency when we're doing theology to sort of lose.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that too. Let me go ahead and get this our question. I need to find a name. Oh, here it is. It's by Trendy. What would it take for?
Oh, yeah. Me and Trendy have a little bit and stuff like that. But I love him. And he said a beautiful thing the other day that I really appreciate about how, despite me and his differences, like we are definitely united in the love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and that's just a beautiful thing. So I really appreciate it. But the thing about it is, I am a trad. I'm a Catholic. To be Catholic means you have to be normal. You have to believe and hold and cling to your more important than your own life, the traditions of, and to depart from a single one of those traditions and to embrace novelty is to kill the life of Christ in your soul and to become a reprobate and a sinner who's going to burn in hell for all of eternity. I take clinging to tradition extremely seriously, to the point where anyone who denies a single tradition of Holy Mother Church should be a reprobate.
Fair enough. Respect that. Okay, we got Goy Groiper. He wants to know. He says, "What are your thoughts on the modern in the church compared to the past view? Do you think they are the same? And if it is, then why does it seem, as in the past, seem to affirm punitive super?" Ooh, that's theology above my pay grade.
Yeah, it's a little above my pay grade as well in terms, because I know what supersessionism is, but I think punitive, when he says punitive, I think he's trying to denote the idea of punishment, like the idea of like the old covenant is taken away from the Jews, and it's sort of this punishment that they have to endure until they embrace Christ in the end times. I what I would say is I don't think what's been talked about in modern theology necessarily departs from the punitive view. And the reason why is I think, like a lot of things, more so the modern view sort of emphasizes, I think, a more positive appreciation of supersessionism, where, God still loves the Jewish people. He's not like, oh, I hate, the people I had once called or what have you. And in his love for them, that's not a love that says that they can be saved out of Jesus Christ, but rather a love that allows them to endure in terms of their existence till the end times, right? And this view is not new either. In fact, this was shared by Pope Innocent III. And if you need a really good kind of treatment of it, I'd recommend the book St. Thomas Aquinas and the Jews, where there's this kind of talk of, even though this covenant was revoked from them, the salvific covenant was revoked from them, there's still this enduring covenant of what I would call love, or the desire for the Jews to ultimately be reconciled with the church in the end times, that persists. And, in that way, I think there's been some silence on the more punitive, but I don't think it's been denounced or what have you by any means. I think just the more positive view of, God still loves the Jewish people very much and wants them ultimately to become Catholic. But there's still that tension in history that does exist, really at their own rejection, right? It's their own rejection of the Messiah, not as a sort of blood curse, but as them continuing to reject the Messiah with upholding blasphemous texts like the Zohar and the Talmud over the Old Testament that points to Jesus Christ being the Messiah.
Amen to that. All right. We only have 3 more questions left. Next question I have from Anonymous. They would like to know, how do you balance your foot all with idolizing Nick Fuentes with your... So I guess, do you think there's...
No,
I don't think there is. Yeah, that's a...
not remotely.
Yeah.
People don't understand. People think you can... People have this very history view of relationships where they have no sense of loyalty to another person. They have no sense of like there being a kind of hierarchy or a loyalty towards one another anymore. And because of that, that's why a lot of our relations... And if you look in the past, like Blessed Alcuin of York, it would have been said that he had a loyalty to Blessed Charlemagne. But Saint Alcuin, I'm sorry, I called him Blessed. Saint Alcuin of York would not have been said to be idolatrous towards Blessed Charlemagne. If Blessed Charlemagne had asked him to do anything against his Catholic faith, he would have rather been martyred than, having done anything that would have wounded or hurt his faith, right? And that's the same way I feel about Nick. If Nick ever said, "Hey, I want you to do this thing that completely goes against Catholicism," I would be the first person to say no. The thing is, though, I would never in a million years expect Nick to do that. I trust Nick. I have been through, even though I haven't played like a direct role in my interactions with Nick or what have you, I've just felt following this movement and being involved in it. I personally, and I think many other Groypers, even a non-Groypers, feel this. Nick is like our brother, right? At the end of the day, like Nick is like our brother, and we feel like family, and we feel like we've been through so much together. And that bond of love that keeps us together in this movement is what has allowed us to weather so much. And that's really the secret spice, or the secret recipe, so to speak, of why this movement has lasted so long. It's this love for a guy who I think inspired us to dream and to care again, and to actually believe that this country is worth fighting for, and that the name of Jesus Christ is worth fighting for in political culture. And so for that, under our Lord Jesus Christ, under the Catholic Church, and under my family, I am loyal to Nicholas J. Fuentes till my dying breath.
All right. Sounds good. I love that, especially from
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you'd literally be the first person to get that, dude, from a military town.
I got buddies right now. They could call me right now. I need help burying a body. And my first question was, okay, do you have an extra shovel? Like, I know these guys that much where I trust that level where I know.
Right.
But, all right, we got 2 more questions left. One that's anonymous. That's, hey, Pinesap, I'm a huge fan of your content, and you're one of the primary reasons. God bless you.
Oh, that's sweet.
They want to know, have you ever gotten around to have Trent Horn on anti-Semitism? I remember seeing that a while back. Also, how are you and John Doyle doing currently? I like you guys both, and it hurts seeing you two fight.
So there's two answers to that one. The first with Trent Horn. Trent texted me, he DM'd me on X, and he said after discerning, he didn't really want to have that discussion about anti-Semitism, or rather, the way I don't want to misquote him, the way he officially said it is he didn't feel like it was proper at this time to have that discussion or what have you. And you know what? I respect that. I don't want to any position that he doesn't want to be in. The reason I kept emphasizing, like, I feel like this needs to be talked about is because this is a huge issue that affects our circles and allows for the exploitation and suffering of the church at the hands of Jews. And that's why I wanted to have this discussion about anti-Semitism, because the church, according to church's definition, right, and anti-Semitism is the hatred of people based on either being religiously or ethnically Jewish. I fully condemn anti-Semitism. Couldn't condemn it higher than any other form of hatred or animosity towards any other. But I will not be shamed into renouncing my Lord and renouncing his salvific mission and being ashamed of my religion because Jews want me to. And that is something that I think that is something that they have actively promoted the past few years, and I think many Catholics have fallen into. And that is something that I am so unwilling to budge on that I'm willing to die and be martyred if it leads to that. And so that is why I wanted to have that discussion with him, because what we do not understand is that using the word anti-Semitism to put a verbal a verbal muzzle over us. And we're never allowed to talk about what they do. We're never allowed to talk about the evils that they engage in. But, all day we can talk about the evils of Islam and how bad Islam is and what Muslims do and that sort of thing. But the moment a Jewish name gets brought up, it's just meant to be silence. And I don't back down to bullies. So I will continue to talk about Jewish power. I will continue to talk about the evils of Judaism, and no one is going to bully me into silence over that.
All right, sounds good.
And then
the John Doyle portion. Sorry,
yeah. So Doyle, I went on the live, and some people were mad at me at kind of the reaction I made to Doyle after in the answers that he gave to live, and maybe I was a little uncharitable towards him, and it that hurts my heart if I. And the only reason I say if is not because I'm being insincere. I just say if because sometimes I am legitimately unsure. I struggle with scrupulosity like many other people, and I try to do the best I can. But with Doyle, like, I have at times been a little nasty to him. I did forward some. I think the definition would be calumny. Calumny, remind me, Sola, but calumny is where you don't know if something is necessarily true. You put it forth as if it's true. I kind of
like reasonable.
Yes, I had forward. I'm not going to say what it is, but I had said something about him on the timeline that was kind of circulating, and that I did delete. That wasn't right. And for that I am sorry. The reason my emotions did get the best of me though is he's been a routine jerk to me. He is called Nick gay. He cat boy, all that kind of nonsense. And as cool as John might have wanted to have been with me, he probably does not like me now. I don't hate him. I legitimately wish the best for him. I really do hope that he lives a great Catholic, or I'm not saying that in a facetious way. I apologize, but I really do want him to live a good Catholic life and go to heaven. I want nothing more than that. And whatever political struggle there is, nothing changes that fact. But if you're going to come in and you're going to say that my friend is all these horrible things, and you're going to throw people under the bus for having the cojones to put their life on the line to talk about Zionism and Jewish power, then I am going to criticize you, and I am going to have a problem with it. And that has been my problem with John Doyle. John, this is going to be a criticism buried in a compliment. John is way too smart to pretend like he doesn't know about Jewish, and he does. And he admits that he does, but his whole silence thing is, oh, well, now's not the right time, and alienates our boomer audience and stuff like that. I'm like, when is going to be? When the boot is on our neck and we're fighting another war for Israel with Iran, and our entire generation of young men are losing their lives in Iraq 2.0, is that going to be the time? I don't think so. And so
he's in really a dilemma. It's frustrating. There's a part of me that YouTube is his sole source of family, and he's been around for a while. Like, I remember him when he was a baby face, same as I remember Nick Fuentes when he was a baby face. And I understand, like, at the end of the day, if I have to feed my wife and someone takes, which unfortunately you've seen tons of like right-wing Catholic guys get, the axe on YouTube, and because they speak out on these things. I get that, but at the same time, you're in a position of politics. Like, you should be talking about this. So it's frustrating because it feels like he's in a rock and a hard place, but at the same time, I don't think it's an excuse to treat others like shit. Like you've been saying, I don't think it's an excuse for him to treat like Nick bad and stuff.
Well, and John, if John didn't want to talk about that, hey, that's okay. I'm not gonna listen. We all got to eat, right? We all gotta pay the bills somehow. I get it. It is a legitimate concern. I'm not gonna castigate it. But when you start stepping on the toes who do have the courage to actually speak up about these issues,
that's where wrong. Yeah,
that's when I have a problem.
There's no shame, and like I was always taught at a young age, never get between. Like, you don't step on someone. Like, if there's like, this is the thing I get money, you don't mess with that. That's like should be off the table. But yeah, 100% what you said. Like, you shouldn't push down others stuff who are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, he's over here and he's talking about theater kid occupied government. It's not theater kid occupied government, big guy. It's people who hate our religion and have been conditioned to hate our religion, who openly spy on us, who openly oppress us, who recite blasphemies against us, and pretty much campaign and run every single political movement that is completely anti-Catholic and anti-white. It's not a little thing. And so when he does this whole like theater kid occupied government and Disney princess movie stuff or whatever, it really ticks me off, because if he was doing this and he wasn't castigating us or condemning us for talking about the real issues, okay, that's fine. You can do that. You're not hurting anybody. You're not a degenerate or whatever. So be it. That's fine, right? Not to have a libertarian attitude about it, but it's like he's not some like he's not a troon or whatever. He's not doing anything like that, and he's not hurting anybody or hurting our movement. So I'd be like, whatever. But when you're saying this as sort of like the ulterior narrative, as if to detract from what we are trying to share about the truth of the situation that our country finds itself in, you're not a serious actor. And at that point, you don't care about the health and well-being of. I mean, are you going like my question to him? So, your whole thing is we're not into infiltration and we're not being tactical or what have you. At what point infiltration process, right?
Exactly.
Because, I mean, even dude, Candace Owens, right? Candace Owens was on Daily Wire. She had all the money. She had the highest position. And, I'm not going to lie. Nick, I'm the same thought as Nick about, I think she's really dishonest and she's trying to obfuscate the issue and stuff like that. But I will say this, even when she just, kind of tapped into the JQ, the little bit that she did, look at what happened to her. Her own father-in-law is on the timeline on Twitter disavowing her. So at what point in this quote unquote infiltration process are we going to just be honest and talk about, the not Christian religion in the room, right?
Exactly. All right. For our final question we have done, this is by Surfer WA wants to know, what are your top 3 book recommendations?
My top 3 book recommendations. Well, Bible and Catechism are easy, so I'm gonna leave those ones out. My top 3 book recommendations would probably be, I have one of them right. Sure, I read it correctly. I would say, sorry, this is a tough one. I'm really having to like.
Oh, you're good.
I would say if you had these 3 books, you would probably be okay rest of your spiritual life.
Would you put the Christ up there?
That's pretty up there, but I don't know quite yet if I'm going to, but here's the first one. Divine Intimacy by Father Gabriel of St. Mary Magdalene. That's probably the best devotional that's like ever been written. I mean, to the point where St. John the 23rd like raved about it. He thought it was one of the best devotionals ever written. I would say that. I would say also just kind of looking around my room, trying to make sure I don't leave a certain or particular book out. I would say the second one would be Theology for Beginners by Frank Sheep. I think if you were to just read any theology book that like introduced you just into Catholicism, actually, no, I scratched that. I would say Map of Life I think Map of Life would be the second one.
I haven't read that one yet. What's that one about?
Map of Life is kind of it's kind of a spiritual introduction into Catholicism. It's a little bit of theology, but it's a little bit of just what we've kind of put in like a very beautiful and poetic way. It's kind of like one part catechism, one part, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And honestly, I feel like God's just putting this on my heart because it keeps coming up in my mind. But honestly, The Way of the Pilgrim, which was written by an anonymous Russian monk, and that's an Eastern Catholic spiritual book. It was written at a time where I guess he would technically be Russian Orthodox, but I mean, it's been like widely beloved by all our saints, like Father Walter Zizek, who's on his way to becoming a saint, loved the book so much he recommended it emphatically, and he's probably one of the best Eastern Catholic future saints that we have in the church. And that book is incredible because it how to always pray. It teaches you how to always remain constant in prayer. And I would say that book keeps your heart focused on prayer in God just eternally. And it's very patristic. There's a lot of wisdom in it. That book was honestly very life-changing. Oh, I remember actually, I scratched Frank Sheed's book. This is a different one. I was in between Imitation of Christ, and honestly, Imitation of Christ is so up there that you could probably cycle this out. But honestly, the true second book, rather than Map of Life, that I would say is Maintaining Peace at Heart by Father Jacques Philippe. It's a very, very little book. It's a book that for the rest of my life, I will probably give out as a confirmation present. But it is such a fantastic book about how much God loves you and how much God like forgives you and the mercy of God and the kind of love that God has for you, that I think anyone who reads that book will have their life changed forever. And those are my three.
All right. Sounds good. Well, Pinesap, it's been amazing having you on as a guest. But before you go, I have two questions for you. The first one being, what are some socials or some things people can find you?
Oh, man. I would say follow me at YouTube, but honestly, I don't know how much I'm going to be uploading on YouTube anymore. So follow me on Rumble, just Pinesap. You can, look up my YouTube channel, follow me on Rumble, and follow my YouTube too. Also Pinesap. Follow me on, X at Pinesap, 3 Wask. Follow me on Instagram at Pinesap3, and my backup is Pinesap1, where I'm going to start doing more live call-ins. And then I'm trying to think what else. And then my Telegram, The Narrative. And I think those should be the main socials that I have.
All right. Sounds good. And my last thing for you, do you have any closing remarks or comments?
I think my closing remark or statement that I would say is Jesus Christ loves you. Jesus Christ forgives you, and the whole purpose of our life is to know just how much he loves us and abide in that love. And that's what I would leave.
Well, guys, this has been a bit of a long episode, and thank you, Pinesap, for sticking through. We'll see you all in the next one.